3 minutes after 10 is the time, and you are listening to James O'Brien, for which I thank you. I can say with some confidence that I will not be embarking upon a monologue quite as long as yesterday's this morning. I don't know if you were listening, but I think we broke all records. And I think we were required to, because we were looking at the, frankly, abominable attempt by Boris Johnson to absolve himself of all blame for the offences that would have seen him suspended from the House of Commons for, we think, now 20 days. The Times has had some sort of a butcher's at the what the Privileges Committee is likely to report, and we may dig into that a little later. But the person to whom I'm going to draw your attention first this morning, somewhat surprisingly perhaps, is Nadine Dories. I mean, really, it's almost as if she is a lens through which we can examine the current national malaise. She also claims this morning that her failure to get into the House of Lords, she blames it all on Rishi Sunak. Rishi Sunak's refusal to let her have a kind of special dispensation on getting into the House of Lords, so she can accept the peerage now, stay in the House of Commons for a while until the next general election, and then step down from the House of Commons and slide effortlessly into the House of Lords. Which Sunak's advice clearly is that you wouldn't be allowed to do that. She sees it as a class war. I need the Daily Mail. I haven't brought the Daily Mail into the studio, which leaves me sort of quite exposed, because they've given her a whole page to, well, I'd like to say put her case, but if I tell you that I feel a bit sorry for her, you won't believe me, will you? And that's fair enough. I mean, she has contacted my employers in the past in the hope of getting me fired, and then boasted about it. She's libelled me under the protection of parliamentary privilege in select committee. She's trolled me on Twitter, questioned my mental health, retweeted claims that I was a terrorist sympathiser. I mean, stone cold trolling. And yet Boris Johnson thought she was the correct person to be put in charge of the online harms bill, something which, thankfully, the absurdity of which was pointed out in select committee, where she continued to lie about me. I mean, it was quite a bizarre situation. It's a little bit like being savaged by a soggy dishcloth, but it's a soggy dishcloth that has been promoted into a position of power and influence. So it doesn't matter how soggy a dishcloth is. If a soggy dishcloth is made Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport, and you work in the media, and the soggy dishcloth is lying about you, libelling you, and trying to get you fired, the soggy dishcloth actually does assume a sort of authority or a power or an influence that is completely ridiculous, but also completely real. So we find ourselves in a very, very strange situation this morning where, because I'm not built like the other lot, I don't derive pleasure from other people's misfortune, particularly. I can sometimes, of course I can, I'm not saintly. But there's something very horrible about what we're seeing here. You're seeing, I would say, I don't know what words you can use. Should we say a fragile woman? I think that's probably fairest. A fragile woman who seems to believe she's the only person on the planet to whom Boris Johnson would not lie through his teeth. This is something we've talked about a lot on the programme. Why do these people keep going back for more when every single thing he touches ends up tarnished or polluted or stained? We talked yesterday about the likelihood of Rishi Sunak being able to wash off the stench of Boris Johnson as they start biting chunks out of each other in public. Will Sunak be able to put clear blue water between him and the former Prime Minister? And then you look at even people like Richard Sharp, who became chairman of the BBC in dodgy circumstances, but was apparently doing a pretty good job as chairman of the BBC. But of course, he got too close to Boris Johnson. So the stench, I'm afraid, couldn't be removed. Everywhere you turn, the stench of Boris Johnson is unignorable. And yet Nadine Dories seems to think she's the only person on the planet to whom he would never lie. Don't start getting cross with me for saying that I feel a bit sorry for her, because listen, it's not going to keep me awake at night, and I've already put the world's smallest violin back in its case. But we listed yesterday people that Boris Johnson had put into the House of Lords, and it was an absolute list of infamy and dishonour. The problem here, of course, is that he probably lied to her about what was and what was not likely to happen, or he did what he always did and just sort of rode roughshod over reality, hoping he'd be able to mould it to his own appetites and wishes. But to see her touring television studios close to tears and attacking the Prime Minister, attacking Rishi Sunak, I'm pretty sure she's spoken out in terms about other politicians being disloyal to leaders that she's liked. I find it such an unseemly picture that I thought we'd talk about it today. As always, only if you want to. What we're going to start with is this notion that she, as a girl born into poverty in Liverpool, would somehow have become a role model for other poor Liverpudlians if she had got into the House of Lords. And I really want to focus on this. I really want you. I can't quite confine the conversation to poor people in Liverpool, can I? Or people in Liverpool who were born into poverty. But I find the psychological contortions necessary for someone like Nadine Dorries to think that she's a sort of poster girl for working class aspiration. I find it genuinely fascinating. So I'm interested in whether or not you, as someone from a humbler background perhaps than Boris Johnson, whether you see Nadine Dorries as a standard bearer for poverty. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. It's not, I mean, so she's blaming James Forsyth, who used to work at The Spectator and now works for Rishi Sunak. She's blaming Rishi Sunak, of course, which is an act of such epic disloyalty that if someone else had done it to Boris Johnson, she'd probably be sticking pins into their wax dolls. She's blaming a conspiracy. I think she's blaming Michael Howard and his appearance on the BBC, another former leader of the Tory party. I think she's blamed the boogie. I can't quite establish whether she's blamed the sunshine or the moonlight, but she is... I mean, this is quite a moment for me in UK politics because I can't quite get a proper handle on what's happening. I can't quite understand why somebody who not long ago was Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport and embarrassed herself on an almost weekly basis, A, thinks that she should be in the House of Lords, and B, thinks the fact that she isn't in the House of Lords is some sort of national tragedy. Okay, so let's get the question right. Here's the headline on the piece at the Mail. See, I don't think the Mail should be doing this to her. It's a bit like, it's a bit medieval. It's a bit like they're putting her in the spotlight. They're pushing her onto television screens and putting her into the newspaper and almost filming a sort of collapse. It's horrible to see in some ways, but as I say, I'm not expecting you to get your violins out at this point. The sinister forces that stopped me, a girl born into poverty in Liverpool, from reaching the Lords. So we'll start by asking how feasible it is that Nadine Dorries has been kept out of the House of Lords because she was born in Liverpool. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. And what I really want to focus in on is the question of whether or not Liverpudlians see her as a standard bearer. So I will confine the conversation in the first instance to people who've got a little bit of skin in the game. You are in Liverpool. I would happily confine an entire hour to calls from Liverpool. We've done it with calls from Scotland before, and we've done it with calls from political constituencies rather than geographical ones. But you are in Liverpool. Nadine Dorries claims that she is a standard bearer for people like you and that her not being allowed into the House of Lords is some sort of conspiracy or sinister forces that have stopped her from reaching the Lords. Can we take that seriously for 20 minutes? Hit the numbers now, you will get through, all right? Can explain to me either what Nadine Dorries is claiming here, 0345 6060 973, or just tell me, as someone in Liverpool, how you feel about her claim that she not only represents you, but is being held back from further advancement. She even called it the class ceiling in one interview, claiming, and she sent her kids to the same school I went to. How do I know that? Because she once called me a public school posh boy and then an expletive. And I got a message from an old mate saying, you know, her kids went to the same school that we went to. And I thought, there's something not right here. How can you be attacking someone for going to the same school that you sent your own children to? So now she's doing that in a way with Liverpool. She's claiming to represent Liverpool. She's claiming to represent the working class. She's claiming that sinister forces and a class ceiling have somehow prevented her from reaching the House of Lords. And because, you know, when they go low, you always have to go high, I'd like to give you the opportunity to explore that and even to wonder whether she might have a point. But ultimately, I'm interested in whether or not the good people of Liverpool, much maligned, of course, by Boris Johnson, and I mean by right-wing media historically, but the good people of Liverpool have found their princess of hearts this morning. Nadine Dorries has cast herself in the role of Liverpudlian poster girl. And wherever you're listening to the programme this morning, I just wonder what we all think about that. If you're listening in Liverpool, I guess that will be our first port of call. Nadine Dorries, born into poverty in Liverpool, prevented by sinister forces from reaching the House of Lords. Hit the numbers now. You will get through. We're just going to examine what you think she's talking about and how feasible it is that she, speaks for Liverpool. 0345 6060 973. 17 minutes after 10 is the time. The sinister forces that stopped me, a girl born into poverty in Liverpool, from reaching the Lords. I'm inviting callers from the Northwest in general, from Liverpool in particular, to express solidarity and sympathy with Nadine Dorries this morning, or indeed to explain to the rest of us what on earth she is blathering on about. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Listen to this. Here's a line in the story. I grew up on a Liverpool council estate and I knew what hunger pains felt like. I had to borrow shoes in order to attend school. And, you know, you'd have to have a heart of stone not to be moved by that. And then you look at her voting record on issues of poverty and perhaps some confusion appears. 10:17. Kevin's in Haywood in Greater Manchester. Kevin, what do you reckon?
Hi, James. Nice to talk to you at last. Good, yeah. I'm actually from Anfield in Liverpool, Breck Road, where I think Doris has said that's where she hails from.
Okay.
And Anfield is, even though it's got a glittering, fantastic stadium there, it's still one of the most deprived areas in the UK, to be frank, as well. And then, her talking about growing up in the council estate, I did that myself. We were sort of shipped out of Liverpool to a new town in the 70s, and then we went through that, deprivation of Thatcher years and managed decline and everything else like that. So, yeah, there is a ping of truth in what she's saying, but where she's gone in her life doesn't really align to the values and the people of Liverpool. As I was saying to your producer then, Scouse Twitter, which is a thing that you don't mess with, she's been disowned.
They're responding to this already, are they?
Yeah, loads. It's absolutely loads. You just got to check it out. And some of the language I won't be able to repeat, of course.
No.
And I think sort of, for most of the people of Liverpool, someone who just moved so far away from their roots, it's just abhorrent, to be frankly honest with you.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm 52% serious this morning and 48% tongue-in-cheek, clearly, because, I've got a little bit of history with her and I've always found her to be quite remarkably repellent in many ways. But is it to suggest that you could muster up a tiny scintilla of sympathy for her because she has come a long way from the sort of background that you also had? It's not completely crackers, is it? Or is it? Is it crackers? It might be crackers.
It is crackers. She's come a long way. She's got to mangle her way into Westminster, become part of that bubble of nonsenseness that's going on completely at the moment.
Yes.
I think, as a city, we always look outwards rather than inwards, so we look up on the rest of the world, etc. as well. So, I think that, I can't give it any sympathy. I just
all right,
can't.
let me try this. Let me try this line. She says, I know, as the reader, you are probably thinking, oh, cry me a river, and I get it. But it was important to me to show that someone from my background could break the class ceiling. There you go. Come on.
No, I can't. I can't do it, mate. Sorry.
Final question.
I'm quite an open and an honest guy with the world,
I'm just trying to work out who she thinks this is going to appeal to, Kevin.
I think GB News, really, just to keep a contract on.
That one. I think she might work for the other one, but I appreciate it is very hard to keep up. So here it is. I know, as the reader, you are probably thinking, oh, cry me a river, and I get it. But it was important to me to show that someone from my background could break the class ceiling. I'm loath to simply ask whether or not you believe her, but I am, and Kevin has kicked things off rather nicely, started the ball rolling. I am drawn to how Liverpudlians feel about her co-opting a city that probably harbours more ill will towards successive Conservative governments, with the glorious exception of what Michael Heseltine did up there, of course. But post-Hillsborough, the relationship between... And Bernard Ingham was still lying about Hillsborough when he went to his grave, Margaret Thatcher's former press secretary. Post-Hillsborough, the idea that a Tory MP can co-opt Liverpool as part of her epic sob story is something that demands at least one morning of discussion. John's in West Kirby on Merseyside. John, are you feeling the milk of human kindness flowing through your veins this morning? Oh, hang on, John's dropped off. 21 minutes after 10 is the time. If you want to grab the phone line that's just been vacated by Kevin, the number you need, of course, is 0345 6060973. A little bit more on this remarkable, I don't know quite what you'd call it, sob story in today's Daily Mail. When Prime Minister Harold Macmillan was asked what the greatest challenge for a statesman was, he famously replied, "Events, dear boy, events." So she's now comparing herself to Harold Macmillan. I'm used to seeing off imposter syndrome, just as I'm used to facing down the people who, over the course of my life, have told me I am not up to it. I mean, again, it's serial instances of simply not understanding things that is the root of most criticism of Nadine Dorries. Where does this class war angle come from? Gwyn's in New Brighton, also on Merseyside. Gwyn, what's going on?
Yeah, I saw the interview she gave on YouTube last night, and I had to laugh because she was born in the 50s, and Breck Road...
She was born in the 50s.
Breck Road was a thriving community. Thriving.
Well, she might have been at the wrong end of the...
shops.
Mate, she was borrowing shoes to go to school, Gwyn. Give her a break.
Well, you know what? Can I just say, that period where she was born, she's a boomer, straight after the war. You could start work on Monday and find a new job on Tuesday. There was lots of work in Liverpool, the docks everywhere, rebuilding, restructuring everywhere.
Well, I haven't got that.
She was poor.
I haven't got the history to comment on that. And I mean, we can poke a little bit of fun at some of her claims because she has such a long and glorious history of lying in public and indeed libeling people. But just as a Scouser, do you describe yourself as a Scouser?
Yeah.
So
I'm born.
The co-opting of Liverpool into this epic sob story. How does that leave you feeling?
From her, it makes me annoyed because you don't become a Tory while living in Liverpool. You become a Tory when you leave Liverpool. So the likes of herself and Esther McVeigh
and Edwina Curry, wasn't she born up there as well?
Well, yeah, Edwina Curry,
Steve Norris,
Coffey and Keegan,
yes,
from Huyton.
You've got quite a pedigree there, Gwyn. You've got quite a bunch of alumni.
And by the way, and there's some male MPs whose names I can't think of right now, but they didn't become Tories in Liverpool because Liverpool was originally fundamentally a liberal city.
Yes,
it was only in the last 30, 40 years when militants and socialism started to take over, but it was always a liberal city. So it makes me laugh when she talks about being brought up in poverty. Now, if you go to Breck Road today, James, yes, without a shadow of a doubt. But I don't think it's one of the top 5 areas of Merseyside that are poverty. And I know this, having worked for the Liverpool City Council, and I know where the poor areas are.
What about the class ceiling, though? I don't want to get too bogged down in the details of her claims about poverty, but the class ceiling that she would have broken, would that have inspired you and your family, do you think, to aim for high office in this country?
Well, wouldn't have, basically, you work for what you get. So, you know, I've never seen a glass ceiling that's prevented me because of my class.
No.
Because, you know, I know I've been educated and I got as far as I wanted to go. I mean, I've never had any aspirations.
I wonder whether it's a bit like that Rees-Mogg effect as well, is that she's desperate to be inside, not have her face up to the window. Quite a lot of people who talk about being anti-elite or anti-establishment, deep down, are just projecting because they're desperate desire to be on the other side. I think in the interview you watched on YouTube, I haven't watched it all myself, but I think she tried to portray Boris Johnson as some sort of working class hero, some sort of scholarship boy who ended up at Eton almost by accident. I mean, the level of delusion, if it was anybody else, would be hard to believe. Patrick's in Croxley Green. Patrick, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello. I like this. We should do more Liverpudlian phone-ins. They've got an energy to them. They've got a bounce.
I find it all a little bit, a bit poverty porn.
Yes.
it's very, very insulting for a start, because like your lad before, just because you come from Liverpool or the North doesn't make you any less of a person than anyone else in the country. In fact, in certain areas, it makes you a better person. But notwithstanding that, I just think it's horrible. I think it's attention grabbing. The fact that she's not in Lords because her boyfriend, wouldn't let her. Allegedly wouldn't let her. It's just bringing Liverpool into it is just insulting. Johnson was already so insulting about Liverpool anyway.
Yes,
and part of me thinks that she's looked at that and she's playing on that. I know she's not that bright, but if she was, she might even be playing on that to say, look what he said about you. But this is me. This is what I could have been if it wasn't for him. I could have stood up for you. I could have done something for you. I could have placed you on the map, which obviously she can't, won't.
I know that you're not going to get much of an open top bus this season up there, but if there be anybody in Liverpool that would see Nadine Dorries go into the House of Lords and think, wow, that means that a little girl like me could do it too?
I very much doubt it, because look at the sort of people in the House of Lords. It's not exactly an accolade, is it?
No, it's not. And the question of quite why she's so desperate to be a member of the unelected elite is one which no doubt she will address shortly. We'll go back up from an expat Liverpudlian to someone still there. Koye is in Liverpool. Koye, what's going on here?
I don't know, James. I've got my head in my hand. Like, these people just whip up their backgrounds whenever it suits them. I think definitely you had once said something about this being kind of psychological or something with Suella Braverman, when she would say our own policies wouldn't let our parents into the country. And now, we've got Nadine Dorries now suddenly remembering she's from Liverpool when the quote-unquote establishment has stopped her from getting to the House of the Lords. And there's never been a time before now, I can bet you, that she said anything to support Liverpool, But she is now suddenly digging into this background thing. I don't know. These people, this current Conservative party they just, they're driving everybody crazy now.
No, I wonder whether that they've created these echo chambers now. She could go on her own TV show. She can write a column in the Daily Mail. She can knock around in the House of Commons. Imagine if you lived in a world where you could say all of this stuff and people would just go, oh, that's terrible, you poor thing. No one would actually say, give your head a wobble, would you? That's absolutely crackers. And all of them now, it's why they're setting up new TV stations all over the place. They're trying to create a world in which disagreement and reality don't even exist. So from Boris Johnson's resignation letter, which was lie after lie after lie after lie, to Nadine Dorries' sob story, which is they're not letting me into the House of Lords because I was born in Liverpool. They're creating these remarkable alternative realities. But the point that we miss on the outside looking in, they believe it. They've persuaded themselves that this stuff is true.
It's true. I think they do really believe it. If you look at Kemi Badenoch as well, she will be the first one to tell you she's from Nigeria, this and that. But when it comes to supporting policies that are going to hinder Nigerians from coming to study in the United Kingdom, she's there to support it. It's so confusing. I don't know
confusing.
What the people's doing.
Well, no, I think that it's trickier for me as a white bloke to comment as robustly in those sort of areas as a person of colour can, or indeed as I may have done in the past, but we're all works in progress. Here's the line that got me, though. I was born into poverty and clawed my way out of it to build a new life for me and my family, and then carved out a role in public service. A seat in the Lords was recognition of that and a means of continuing to give back to society. I'm not going to lie, I believe sinister forces conspired against me and have left me heartbroken. But that emotion gives me all the strength I need to keep on fighting. I don't know how thick the walls of your echo chamber would need to be to conjure up that as a plausible depiction of reality. But what would she point to in her career as things to be proud of, things that should be rewarded with a seat in the House of Lords? The time she revealed publicly as Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport that she had absolutely no idea how Channel 4 was funded. The time that she WhatsApped a bunch of colleagues asking them what the customs union was because she kept losing arguments about why it was the right thing to leave the customs union. The time she congratulated Nadeem Zahawi on becoming Health Secretary when he'd actually just become Chancellor, the time she accused the BBC of nepotism after it had emerged that she, I think, had both of her daughters at one point on her payroll in the House of Commons. I mean, I could go on, and often have. The Channel 4 one was probably a favourite when she claimed that it was in receipt of public money and didn't know that it was funded through a commercial model and doesn't receive any taxpayers' cash. The scale of ignorance is off the charts, and yet the scale of self-pity today is breaking records. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need if you, as a Liverpudlian, would like to express solidarity with your people's princess. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines. 10:34 is the time. Updates from Nottingham as and when they occur, of course. If you're just tuning in, you should know that a man has been arrested after three people were arrested on suspicion of murder after three people were found dead in Nottingham this morning. Grim scenarios, which we will do our best to get our heads around in the course of not just this morning on LBC, but throughout the entire day. I'm always wary of going early before things have been properly reported or confirmed, and you should be wary too. It's a very difficult thing to do in the world of social media, and as always on these matters, there are plenty of people with their own axes to grind, but the 31-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of murder after two people were found dead in the street in Ilkeston Road just after 4 o'clock this morning. A third man found dead on Magdala Road in Nottingham, and another three people in hospital after someone tried to run them over in a van in Milton Street. Police believe all the incidents are connected. A number of city centre roads were closed down as the events were investigated, described as a major incident, and the facts, the details emerging, no doubt, throughout the course of the morning. Alex Hulse is LBC's reporter at the scene. We know a little bit more than we did when Nottingham first started popping up this morning, Alex, but still not a great deal more.
Yeah, of course. Confirmation in that last couple of hours or so, a 31-year-old man was arrested on suspicion of murder. 3 were killed as a van was driven around the city, colliding into people. 2 people were found dead in Ilkeston Road, a main thoroughfare into the city. That was around 4 o'clock this morning. And then officers were called to reports of a van trying to run over people in Milton Street. That's where I am now. I'm right next to the Victoria Shopping Centre, which is the main shopping centre in the city centre. And it's normally a thoroughfare with buses and taxis. Trams have also been completely suspended today as officers have been investigating. And then after that, another man was found dead a couple of miles north from where I am in Magdala Road, which is more of a suburban street in the city. Now, concerns have been growing from people who've been coming into the city to start their day. At first, it was very much, what's going on? That kind of, let's take some photos and videos. And many people have been asking for police for directions and diversions as to where they can go because their normal route isn't available, and have been talking about what happened. Now, you might be able to also hear in the last few minutes. This has just been happening. A police helicopter, I believe, just above me. I'm not all too sure around that, why that is there, but very much part of this ongoing investigation. Detectives have said that this is horrific and tragic and that their investigation's early in its stages, but they've asked people to be patient as they look into it. There have been messages too from MPs from across the county. Robert Jenrick is the MP for Newark. He's the immigration minister. He said that all of us share a sense of shock at this terrible attack, and that thoughts go out to the family and friends of those who've been killed.
Alex Hulse, many thanks. Live at the scene in Nottingham, the scene of, one of these 3 suspected murders. 31-year-old man under arrest. More on that story as and when it develops. 10:38 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. We are focusing this morning on the former Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport, and a frankly unprecedented appearance in the media this morning from Nadine Dories, claiming that the decision of Rishi Sunak not to open up a VIP lane that would allow her to stay in the House of Commons despite having accepted a seat in the House of Lords is evidence of sinister forces conspiring against her because she believes she was born in Liverpool in poverty. I just wonder if anyone buys that. and how you as a Liverpudlian feel about having your city and possibly your background co-opted by someone who, I should credit this, it's an unsigned text. I could probably have passed it off as my own, but it's only fair to admit that it wasn't my own. Someone who seems to think that she's a character from Catherine Cookson, when in reality, she's a character from Catherine Tate. Anne-Marie is in Kazanlak in Bulgaria. Hello.
Hello.
What's on your mind?
Long-time listener, James.
Well, welcome aboard.
I'm from Liverpool.
What are you doing in Bulgaria?
I won't bore you with the details.
All right,
it's a
never
long
mind.
and torrid story. Brexit and COVID combined, but that's another story.
Okay.
I just wanted to say, having watched Nadine Doris on the news yesterday evening,
Yes.
I wanted to put my foot through the television.
Why?
Because the idea, firstly of all, I find it very difficult. I cannot understand how anyone from Liverpool can be a Tory, given what the Tories did to my beautiful city in the 1980s, when they talked about managed decline.
Yes.
And the long history that Liverpool's had opposing Tory governments. I mean, people forget in 1926 during the general strike, they put warships in the Mersey pointing at the docks. You know, you have. I mean, but you've also got Michael Heseltine's attempts to rehabilitate the city. He's still sort of spoken of in war. Well, he's one of the few. What I would describe as it's a bit of a claw in the throat, but a reasonable Tory, somebody that you could sit down with and have a grown-up conversation about
he called this lot out ages ago, didn't he? From Johnson down. What then is going on in her head? Because in a way, the Johnson narrative about Liverpudlian self-pity, which is obviously a pretty repellent thing to have published in the context that he did, I think this is what an earlier caller was touching on. Doris could be accused of sort of doing it today. Why has she brought Liverpool into it at all, do you think?
Well, as I say, the woman's an idiot for a start off.
Well, you can say
and
that.
And I find it embarrassing that, a working class woman from Liverpool was in that position and made an absolute fool of herself.
But that's the point, isn't it? You'd think that she'd be capable. I mean, you may think she's an idiot, but she should be able to understand the reality of what she actually did while she was in Parliament.
This is it, they're delusional.
It is quite remarkable, isn't it? I mean, the voting record as well on issues that may have improved a lot of...
exactly.
Yes, the most vulnerable people.
The benefits and disabled people having their PIP cut and all of everything. As I say, I find it incredibly difficult to understand anybody from my kind of background sitting in that chamber and listening to the nonsense and not be absolutely apoplectic with rage at the things that they've done to the country. I'm very proud to be British.
Yes.
Very proud to be from Liverpool. The independent state of Scousland. We fought long and hard for union rights, for women's rights, for gay rights. The whole plethora of individual vulnerable people who needed protection.
Yes.
And for somebody to sit and then cry that she was poor, it just makes my blood.
Well, she probably was poor. Whether she actually borrowed shoes to go to school or not, we'll probably never know.
I find that hard to
well, who would you borrow shoes from?
Well, this is it. But the other thing is you tend to find that poor people tend to spend the most on their kids. They'll go without for themselves.
Very true.
But they will definitely. My mum worked 3 jobs so that I could go to university.
Well, you say, she did pay her own daughters about 80 grand from the public purse, so she's managed to break...
No, but that wasn't out of her own pocket.
She's managed to break the cycle of... No, it may not have been out of her own pocket, but it was out of her own wages bill, so she's managed to break that cycle there. Marie, we should surely salute her for that.
No. As I say, every time her face is on television, it's, oh God, not again.
If she was here, if the People's Princess graced us with a royal visit, Anne-Marie, and
I'm sorry, and this is probably really outrageous.
Well, hang on,
I find it very difficult not to keep my hands off her.
Yeah, well, I know that you're speaking metaphorically. And I don't want anyone making comments about Boris Johnson either at this point. I'm interested in what you think she would say if you said, what was your greatest achievement? Who have you really helped as a politician?
Myself.
What section of society have you really helped? What?
None.
But she's the people's princess, though.
She can call herself what she likes.
She's Scylla's heir, Anne-Marie. She's the heir to Scylla.
Well, that's another one. Don't even get me going on air.
I'm looking forward to the long and torrid story of how you ended up in Kazanlak in Bulgaria on another occasion. But so far, not a lot of support for Nadine Dorries' bid to become Liverpool's People's Princess. But it's still only 11:15, and we'll be staying with this until at least 11 o'clock. 0345 60 60 973. In fact, Anne-Marie, judging by my inbox, getting a lot more love from Liverpudlians than Nadine Dorries ever will. This text, did she ever give the shoes back? Asks this anonymous texter. I don't know. And we shouldn't laugh. 11:45 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. At least time for a few more calls on the vexed question of whether or not Nadine Dorries has been held back from the House of Lords by dint of her Liverpudlian birth or something. 10:48 is the time, and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. We're just trying to find the Nadine Dorries fans, in a way. The Liverpudlians born perhaps into difficult circumstances who look at Nadine Dorries with a history of voting to reduce universal credit and support the bedroom tax and reduce the support available to disabled people and sundry other vulnerable members of society. And the people who look at her and think, yes, that's my girl. She is the people's princess. Because it is apparently sinister forces that have stopped her, a girl born into poverty in Liverpool, from reaching the Lords. The question of exactly what it is she's done that she feels merits a seat in the House of Lords is perhaps one for the ages. And in her defence, if Kate Hoey and Claire Fox and Zach Goldsmith can get one off Boris Johnson, then why shouldn't Nadine Dorries? The technical answer to that question, of course, is that because she sought to get there via some sort of VIP lane that Boris Johnson had promised her was viable. And those words there would, I think, for most normal people, have sounded something of an alarm bell. Boris Johnson had promised her. Imagine that. Imagine being the only person left who thinks Boris Johnson tells you the truth. Quite incredible. It's just her and Peter Cruddas. Another one who got a seat in the House of Lords, against the advice of the House of Lords Appointments Commission. So no wonder Boris Johnson thought Rishi Sunak would be able to wave it all through, because he'd done it himself in the past. But, as Rishi Sunak said yesterday, in a rare outbreak of backbone, he wasn't prepared to do something dodgy, and that is why they've all thrown their toys out of the pram. I think we'll do well to improve upon the description of Nadine Dorries as someone who thinks she's a Catherine Cookson character, but is in reality more like a creation of Catherine Tate. Neil's in the Black Isle in the Scottish Highlands. Neil, what would you like to say?
Yeah, I mean,
Neil Lancaster. James, Neil Lancaster.
Yeah, that's me.
Gosh, hello.
Hello, how are you?
I love your books. You know I love your books, don't you?
No, that's very kind of you. Thank you. And I appreciated you saying so a little while ago.
No, I really love them. I think that you've found a little seam there. I look forward to you mining it even more. You're on an absolute roll, mate. Congratulations. Really good books. Thank you. Well, great. It's lovely to have you on the phone. What did you want to say?
Well, it's a funny one, isn't it? Because despite my accent, I clearly sound someone from the southeast of England, but I was born in Liverpool.
Well, you used to be an undercover cop, though, so you could be anybody, couldn't you?
Well, there is that, yeah. I can change my accent, although I've got to be a little bit careful with that one now.
Of course.
But I was born in Liverpool. My dad was a carpenter, trained on the docks. My granddad was an orphan during the First World War, brought up in a poorhouse, so a real good, solid working class background. Yes. But my dad worked really hard. He managed to get himself qualified as a clerk of works. Right. And he ended up moving his family down to Kent. And I'm council estate in Kent. But I was the only person in my house without a Scouse accent.
Oh, I see. Yes.
Yeah. And so what gets me about this is the weaponisation, this flagrant, self-regarding weaponisation of being a Scouser. I'm proud to be a Scouser. It hasn't held me back in any way, shape or form. My class hasn't held me back in any way, shape or form. But because Nadine Dorries thinks she can weaponise this to somehow curry favour, she's made an enormous miscalculation.
It is a remarkable intervention when you put it like that. This plea for pity is based upon her origins, which everyone with even vaguely similar origins finds even more ridiculous than I do.
if she wants to really irritate a very large proportion of a fabulous city, the city of my birth, she's gone about it entirely the right way. Because she is saying, look at me, despite being from Liverpool, as if it's this great big millstone round one's neck.
There's shame there.
It's almost like there's this inferred shame in where she comes from. I mean, I don't sound Liverpudlian, but I'm fiercely proud of my Scouse DNA. You know, but I don't deploy it. I don't deploy it to say, look at me, despite coming from Liverpool and the hardship of coming from Liverpool, I'm now writing books for a living.
How can you prove, Neil Lancaster, that you are not part of the sinister forces that stopped her, a girl born into poverty in Liverpool, from reaching the Lords?
Well, if I only had that power, James, I would have deployed it many, many years ago.
Because that's the thing, you know. She's not paranoid if everyone really is out to get her.
Oh, God, this is the other thing, isn't it? This constant harping on by the elite, telling us that it's the elite that's holding them back.
And it's posh boys that are against her, and she obviously worships Boris Johnson and Jacob Rees-Mogg. It is quite, the more you talk, I nearly didn't talk about it today. I'm glad I did, because the calls have been off the charts, better than me actually this hour. But it's incredible that she comes out with this stuff. And I think you've touched on something there. There's shame at the heart of it. There's shame about her roots, not pride. Otherwise, she wouldn't be desperate to be accepted by people like Boris Johnson and Jacob Rees-Mogg and desperate to be in the House of Lords. It's quite... Would you laugh at me, Neil, if I said it's quite sad in a way? It's quite poignant?
It's incredibly sad, and it's incredibly poignant that she feels the need to suggest that her heritage, her Scouse heritage or a working-class heritage, has been in some way a massive holdback to her when she spent however many years it is in the House of Commons, has written a number of best-selling books. I could chuckle at those, but I won't. I don't like to denigrate another author's work.
No, quite right too.
But, you know, and to use this fact that despite me being from Liverpool, look where I've got, and despite it, and now because of it, they're weaponising that against me to stop me getting into the House of Lords.
What can I reach for? It's like, she's been rattling around in the kitchen drawer where you keep the old chargers and the leads that you can't remember what. She's been desperately trying to find something that she can use to beg for people's pity and sympathy, and she's come up with being born in Liverpool into a poor family. I think you're right, and I hadn't touched on the shame. I'm just going to plug your books for you, Neil, if that with your permission. I've only read the Max Craigie ones. I haven't read the Tom Novak ones. I'm saving them for when I finish my own book. I'm not allowed to read thrillers at the moment because but the Dead Man's Grave is the first one, followed by The Blood Tide, The Night Watch, and the latest out in April, Blood Runs Cold. They are. And would you hate me if I said they get better and better? Because I know you came to writing quite late in life. I think that The Night Watch is. I haven't read Blood Runs Cold yet, but I think The Night Watch is an absolute masterpiece. I really do.
Well, no, obviously I'm very, very grateful.
How did you get Ian Rankin? How did you get Ian Rankin to describe it as Think Reacher, Jack Reacher fronting Line of Duty? If you'd written your own blurb for the front of a book, that probably would have been it, wouldn't it?
It might have been. Ian is a tremendous guy. He's a huge supporter of up-and-coming writers. He's one of the great guys, and about to become Sir Ian Rankin. I believe he's visiting His Majesty today.
Well, let's hope the sinister forces don't stop him. You know, a boy born in Edinburgh, or born in Fife, actually, born in the Kingdom of Fife. Thank you, Neil Lancaster. What a lovely treat and surprise for me. One of the writers I've discovered relatively recently and fallen absolutely in love with. But of course, unable to prove, particularly with his background in covert policing, that he's not actually a member of the sinister forces that have conspired to keep Nadine Dorries out of the House of Lords. There's another story around today about the number of people who believe conspiracy theories, and it's shocking. But if Nadine Dorries, a former Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport, can genuinely convince herself that sinister forces are trying to keep her out of the House of Lords, how cross can you really get with your Auntie Keith for believing that the World Economic Forum is trying to overtake the world? Alison's in Bury St Edmunds. Alison, what would you like to say?
Well, I couldn't agree more with your previous two callers, to be fair. I thought Anne-Marie was lovely.
We've not got much support for Nadine today. I feel bad now. I thought people would be queuing up to praise the People's Princess.
Well, where did she get that title from? Because
I just gave it to her.
I wouldn't. Well, yeah. But I mean, I'm from Liverpool as well.
Yes.
I don't live there anymore, as you can see. I'm in Bury St Edmunds. But I'm proud to be from Liverpool, proud to be British. Sometimes I'm a little bit ashamed because of the shenanigans that go on at the moment. But I just think I think she's I'm gobsmacked. I think she's got a cheek. I can't speak for Liverpudlians, obviously, because if I spoke to my dad about this, he'd probably swear, and I wouldn't be able to repeat it on radio. And I just think, like your previous caller said, it's almost an insult.
Yes, well, it's. I mean, it was started off being psychologically bizarre, but it's actually become pretty offensive, actually, in the course of the conversation, hasn't it? Who on earth does she think she is?
Exactly. And if I was going through what she was going through at the moment, there's no way I would say anything. I take my hat off to Rishi. I'm not Conservative by any shape or form. No. I'm sick and tired of all this he said, she said. But I take my hat off to Rishi where he said, well, if you don't like it, tough.
Yes.
I do believe to a point, but he had nothing to do with it because there's a committee who whittles them down. And I wouldn't want her in the House of Lords.
Well, no.
She makes horrendous decisions. And
what do you think she thinks she's done that merits a seat in the House of Lords?
Well, if I say there are plenty of memes and plenty of pictures going around where she's looking up at Boris in, when he's been doing
services
she had a love for him.
Services to sycophancy.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah,
I think you're right. I think, in fact, quite a few of those appointments were for services to sycophancy, weren't they? So, I mean, if you could muster up some sympathy for her, it would be based on the notion of, well, look at the flotsam and jetsam that has got into the House of Lords. Why can't I have a go as well? And you can't really argue with that if she points at some of the other people, services to sycophancy or services to Conservative donations. You can see her point, but not objectively.
Exactly. And she's, Boris had her support from day one, and I think he had her support because she had a thing for him. I'll put that out there. Many people have said it as well.
No, I think some of the photographs of her looking at him, I think the word my mum would use is mooning in the old fashioned sense, not in the dropping your keks on stage sort of sense. Thank you, Alison. And services to sycophancy is perhaps a polite way of putting that. I wonder what Nadine Dorries thinks about Charlotte Owens getting a peerage when she herself didn't. This is a young woman, a 29-year-old young woman who is to become the youngest ever life peer on Boris Johnson's list. That one got past the House of Lords Appointments Committee, unlike 8 of his nominations, whose track record is certainly opaque. It's rather hard to identify precisely what her service to the United Kingdom may have been on a scale sufficient to merit a seat in the House of Lords. But to be fair, Nadine Dorries is a lot older than 29 and she's been in the cabinet, and it's just as hard to work out what she's done that she thinks might merit a seat in the House of Lords, except of course services to sycophancy. It is 4 minutes after 11 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. We're going to move north now from Liverpool to Scotland, and a conversation that needs to be respectful of contempt of court laws and libel laws. But it's also a conversation that I think gets filed under helping each other understand events that are not under daily scrutiny south of the border. The ongoing police investigation into the SNP's finances and a number of high-profile arrests have not dented support for the party or independence. This is according to Professor John Curtis, Scotland's leading poll expert. So it was Nicola Sturgeon who was arrested and questioned for 8 hours and then released without charge this weekend. Previously, the SNP's former chief executive and the husband of Nicola Sturgeon was himself arrested as well, and the former party treasurer Colin Beattie. None of them charged. Images of police forensic tents being erected on the front garden, the front lawn of the home where Murrell and Sturgeon live, I think were very... the word I want. I was going to say arresting, but that would be a fairly poor pun, even by my relatively dismal standards. They were certainly jarring, weren't they? They were, well, depending on what you think about things, they were remarkable. It puts Hamza Yousaf, the current First Minister, in the unenviable position of being the only SNP First Minister, past or present, not to have been arrested. Alex Hammond, of course, had legal troubles a few years ago. So I think I'm going to do this, if I may, from the London perspective. To begin with, the question from the London perspective, the answers from the Scottish perspective. you would think, wouldn't you, that these sort of events, arrests, forensic tents being erected on party leaders' front lawns, the unexpected resignation of Nicola Sturgeon, and the question still hanging over the SNP's finances. It's the whereabouts of about £600,000 in donations that are under investigation. You would perhaps expect that to impact upon support for the party in general or for independence in particular. And it may yet. But Professor John Curtis, who is always worth listening to, says that the scandals engulfing the SNP appear to have had little impact on the party in the eyes of voters. And I've checked the reporting on this because, you know, a party sympathetic or a newspaper sympathetic to the SNP or antithetic to the SNP may have put a certain spin on their reports. But John Curtis, politics professor at Strathclyde University and the doyen at the moment of pollsters in this country, has written it up for the newspaper, a genuinely impartial newspaper, saying that Nicola Sturgeon's personal popularity has remained high. Support both for independence and the SNP have remained stable since the last leadership election, and voters, according to Curtis, may not be as caught up in the drama as the opposition parties would like to think. So there it is. He said the drama has had remarkably little impact on support for either the SNP or for independence, while it appears to have done little damage to Ms Sturgeon's personal reputation. I'm intrigued by this for a number of reasons, but I noticed Hugo Rifkin writing in the Times today about populism and including Nicola Sturgeon in that category. And I understand why, because this sort of story here suggests that Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP enjoy the sort of a support that is not necessarily affected by these sort of events, and that their enemies will always essentially portray these events in an exaggerated or an embellished way. I don't know, and we will explore these territories. I have to be slightly careful on these topics because I can't spot the cultists coming in the same way that I can when we're talking about Brexit or Boris Johnson. My antennae, my cultish antennae, and please don't get offended, because unless you are utterly committed to your position to the exclusion of all evidence and fact, then I'm not talking about you. I think we've seen cultism in the Labour Party in recent years, and we've seen it in the Conservative Party. It's still going, of course, in the Conservative Party. But I don't understand the Scottish issues to the same level that I understand Westminster issues. I'm getting better all the time, but nobody's perfect. I would expect the recent events involving Nicola Sturgeon, Colin Beattie, Peter Morrell, I would have expected that to have a much bigger impact on support for their party and support for their raison d'etre, which is, of course, Scottish independence. So we will start with the question of why do you think it hasn't? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Why do you think Professor Curtis's findings are what they are? Why have the arrest, no less? And I know Scottish law and English law are different, but still a party leader, past or present, getting arrested is a big deal. We'll be talking to John Sopel a little later this hour in America about the former president who's now facing federal charges, of course, utterly unprecedented in America. And while Nicola Sturgeon is facing no charges as things stand, the investigation continues. The arrests are... I can't say arresting, and now I've got a brain freeze on it. I just want to keep saying the arrests are arresting, which is just stupid in every imaginable way. I would expect the recent events to have had a much bigger impact upon support for all three parts of this triangle. The SNP in general, Nicola Sturgeon in person, and Scottish independence in particular. Calls for Nicola Sturgeon to be suspended continue to be resisted by the First Minister Humza Yousaf. I would have thought, personally, you always have to imagine what you would do if it was politicians or a party to which you didn't have warm feelings or you didn't have much sympathy. I would have thought that adopting the Keir Starmer model here and suspending someone until an independent inquiry or a police inquiry has been completed would be the correct course. It's what Keir Starmer does in a heartbeat. I forget who's currently suspended, but Nick Brown, the former chief whip, suspended last September over an unspecified complaint that will not be, of course, reported until the independent inquiry is complete. Starmer moving very, very quickly, even excluding a former leader of the party from parliamentary membership or standing for the Labour Party in any subsequent elections. So I personally, and this is not the central line of inquiry this hour, I personally can see some sense in Yousaf doing that, but it puts him in a very difficult professional and personal position. The question of why these polls are not showing any diminishment or decline in support for, in no particular order, Nicola Sturgeon, the SNP, and Scottish independence just genuinely intrigues me. I'm going to say something now that will probably have all of my listeners in Scotland or all of my listeners who are fully engaged in Scottish politics sniggering away until tea time. I'm going to say, I wonder whether we can conduct this conversation in an unfractious fashion. I wonder whether we can actually do a genuine intellectual inquiry into what is, to me, a very surprising issue without it descending into factionalism and fury. 12 minutes after 11 is the time. Should we kick on? You can tell that it's not a topic that I've got particularly pungent opinions or deep knowledge of, because I'm going to take a call before the first break and curtail my monologue. Boris Johnson, by contrast, 34-minute monologue yesterday, and I could have easily carried on for another 34. Let's go to Dundee. Susan is there. Susan, make some sense of this for me, please.
OK, James, I'm a very long-time listener, but my first time I've called, so please be gentle with me.
Of course, I'm always gentle, Susan. Carry on.
I would say, for me anyway, in Scotland, it's all about independence, and they're the only party that are going to give us a chance to get that.
Right.
I feel very staunchly about Scotland being a country in its own right. And, I mean, I'm a very big supporter of Nicola as well, by the way, but I think we have to let the law do its job, and if it comes to that, then it'll all come out in the wash. But right now, for me, I will always vote SNP just now, because I want to get to the point where we have independence, and then I will choose which party I want to vote for after that,
That's
whether it be
interesting.
Labour, Green Party, whatever. But it will never be Tory, by the way, never in a million years. And that's another huge part of this as well. For me, we have watched the mess in Westminster unfold, and we're fed up of it. We're sick of it. We've never voted the Tories in for years. Why should we put up with this any longer?
I'm surprised sometimes by where the numbers have gone post-Brexit on that, because I think for a while it looked as if it was going to really boost Scottish independence, because they've dragged Westminster, if you like, or the Tories have dragged Scotland out of the European Union against their will. But some of the analysis I've read posits the notion that actually seeing the damage done by one schism has made people warier of supporting another schism, another sort of move away from a union, if you like, in this case the union of the United Kingdom as opposed to the European Union. But actually, listening to your answer to today's question, it's not that surprising at all that support for independence would be untouched by recent events, because they're two completely different things. But support for Nicola Sturgeon personally, that's probably a little closer to cultish, is it, than support for independence? And I use the word very, very lightly, Susan.
I would say, and I get what you're saying as well. And I mean, I think I'm not cultish in terms of Nicola Sturgeon. I think she's done a great job for a lot of what's happened. But, I'm not blind to the fact she's not perfect either. And again,
I wasn't suggesting you were. I was just wondering, that Starmer approach of suspending someone under investigation, even if it's a close ally, until the investigation is complete, until the inquiry is concluded. And maybe I'm misreading it. Maybe that doesn't involve a decline in support. It involves pressing pause on your support at whatever level it was at when the problem started, and then taking your finger off pause when the investigation is complete, and either staying where you were before or watching it decline according to the findings.
I think it's innocent till proven guilty.
Yeah, no, you're quite right. You're quite right. But if John Curtis thinks it's interesting, Susan, then it is clearly interesting, albeit that your analysis, I think, knocks some of the shock off his reports. 11:15 is the time. A sparkling debut from Susan in Dundee. If you've been thinking of ringing in over the last few weeks and you haven't quite done it yet, then follow her example. Take her as an inspiration in much the same way that this morning the people of Liverpool are looking towards their princess, Nadine Dories. It is 18 minutes after 11. The accusation against Humza Yousaf is of preferential treatment over his failure or refusal so far to suspend Nicola Sturgeon from the Scottish National Party after she was arrested by police investigating the party's finances. Other members of the party under similar investigation would in the past have perhaps expected to be suspended. That's certainly the accusation from his and indeed her critics. The Scottish Tories calling him weak. The Scottish Tories, of course, answerable to Rishi Sunak, and claimed he was giving favourable treatment to Ms Sturgeon because she privately backed him to be the SNP leader in the recent leadership contest to succeed her, which seems a feasible accusation, doesn't it? The interesting element here is how the ongoing investigations up to and including 3 arrests of arguably the 3 most senior members of the setup in Nicola Sturgeon's time, all arrested, all released without charge, I should stress, although the Treasurer Colin Beattie later resigned from the post. None of them have been suspended from the party, and surprisingly to me at least, none of this has impacted upon the popularity of the party in Scotland. I think our first caller reminded us of the impossibility of separating party from principle here. If you support independence, where are you supposed to go with your support? But I am interested in why you think this situation has unfolded, given that Professor John Curtis, the doyen of polling, considers it to be newsworthy, and indeed so do I. Andrea is in Huntly. Andrea, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello.
I very much agree with the first caller, actually. I've lived in the north of Scotland now for 40 years, and I have yesterday joined the SNP.
Gosh, yesterday?
Yes.
Okay.
Precisely because of all this fuss and the fact that my personal MP is Douglas Ross, who is the leader of the Tory party in Scotland,
yes.
and is such an objectionable man.
He's not here to defend himself, is he? So
no, I appreciate that. I did email him to tell him that I was going
belt
to
and
join
braces,
the SNP
belt and braces,
because
Andrea.
of him.
Yes, okay, gosh.
And I got an email straight back saying that the SNP have done nothing for Scotland, etc., etc. His own personal hatred of Nicola Sturgeon has been so obvious over the years. She is a Marmite character. People love her or hate her. But I do agree with the last caller that if we want independence, the SNP is the only place to go. And I think what the press have done with these arrests and stuff, firstly, they have not mentioned that under Scottish law, you are arrested before being questioned.
Yes.
You can't just go in to help police with their inquiries, whatever.
No, I have made that point. And she was, and they were all released without charge after
absolutely. But also the overkill of the tents in the garden, the cordons around the house and all this kind of stuff. You kind of think, hold on, are they digging up a body here? It was ridiculous. And people seem to have seen it as totally ridiculous.
I thought the tents were more about limiting. I thought it was an ill-advised attempt to limit what could be photographed, but it did, as you say, look like something you'd see on Lewis or Endeavour.
Absolutely.
Or not so much Endeavour, but on Line of Duty or something like that when they're
yes, and it did. And those are the pictures that made the front pages, and people think, oh my goodness, this is a real crime.
I don't think it was deliberate. I don't think the police were trying to do sort of negative PR for them. I just think somebody somewhere made a silly decision. We've got to stop the snappers getting a picture of us, going through Sturgeon's bins, and the best way to do that is to put up these. I could be completely wrong, for the record.
I think it just focused a lot of attention on negativity against the SNP.
Okay, let me play a game, if I may. Given that you've put your cards on the table so clearly with regards to Douglas Ross, if the Scottish Conservatives had raised just shy of £700,000 for a second independence referendum, it's unlikely, I grant you, but bear with. And it subsequently emerged that there was only £97,000 left in that bank account, even though the second referendum had never been held. would you not be sharpening your cudgels for Mr. Ross, given your antipathy?
Absolutely not, I'm afraid. Because
really?
Yes, because...
Hang on, I'm just going to do that one octave higher. I'm just, if I may, because I don't think I sounded skeptical. Really?
That was very good.
It's like the Liverpudlian hour now, isn't it?
No, I mean, there are actually funds missing from the Tory party, but they are not willing to disclose them. They're also not willing to disclose their membership numbers.
No, I know, but I'm just saying, if it was a politician you didn't like in exactly the same scenario that Sturgeon is currently in, I don't think you'd be quite this charitable, would you?
Okay, probably not.
No, thank you.
Probably not. All. That is fair enough. I just feel that if we want independence in Scotland, we have nowhere else to go. Yeah. I think if we get independence, like your last caller said, then we're free to vote for other parties. But the only party that is supporting independence is the SNP. And whether you agree with their politics or not, if you want independence from Westminster, which has done so much damage in Scotland, I mean, we pay higher electric bills.
Don't start this, because the phones will ring off the hook with people challenging everything you say, and it will turn into an independence debate, which is not what we're having now. It's an inquiry into John Curtis's findings, Andrea. Thank you. I shall ask you on another occasion what your personal journey was politically. 40 years living there, clearly not born there, and being such a passionate advocate of independence. 25 minutes after 11 is the time. This is interesting to me as well. Similar themes, picking up on something, Andrea. So this is from James, who's in Kirkcaldy. For me, when I walked into the newsagents this morning, encountered an almost whitewash of headlines attacking both the former and current leader of the SNP. I'm inclined to smell something fishy, and I'm not talking Arbroath Smokies. Hashtag client journalism, suggests James. Look, there is clearly... In the print media, and I know a lot of my Scottish listeners feel that the BBC let them down very badly during the independence referendum as well, but I don't know enough to pass definitive comments on that. But in the print media, yeah, of course, there's going to be an attempt to undermine the SNP. They are a left-wing party. The direction they would have gone in if Kate Forbes had won the leadership election, I do not know, but that is anathema to the kind of people that own newspapers in this country, as anybody from the left could tell you. 26 minutes after 11 is the time. Callum is in Moray. Callum, what would you like to say?
I can say I'm not very charitable towards Douglas Ross as well.
No, I don't want to turn it into a Douglas Ross phone-in. This is a Nicola Sturgeon phone-in, Callum. Go on.
I know. I'm not an SNP candidate. I'm a lived-in councillor in Murray.
Okay.
I attempted to be and didn't get voted in.
Yeah.
Talked to you a couple of times before, but I think there's a context to this, James, that we're missing.
Yes.
The Scottish population has been very well educated in the level of corruption and manipulation that's happened over the last 6 or 7 years in Westminster. So the £12 million in Taran Banks, especially £38 million to Michelle Bone, the contracts to Matt Hancock. There's a much higher level of...
Yeah, I don't know that we can call that corruption yet. I mean, this is one of the things that the COVID inquiry is going to look into. But certainly, and I'm not across necessarily all of the things you cited, but we can certainly mention that Michelle Mone's husband's company did manage to get its hands on epic amounts of public money in return for, well, they're being sued by the government because a lot of it was unusable, a lot of it was unsuitable, and the money, as David Conn picked up the Paul Foot Award at the Private Eye event the other evening. David Conn of The Guardian won that award for revealing that the money all ended up in bank accounts linked to a not huge amount of the money ended up in bank accounts linked to the family. But why? I mean, you're close, you're flirting, Callum, with the two wrongs make a right defence here.
No, it's not the two wrongs make a right. I just think there's a level of context here. The sort of level of money we've seen removed from the end. So the £600,000 SNP is not acceptable, but there's a comfort here in the fact the Scottish police are investigating it and they're dealing with it robustly, which has not happened in any of these circumstances in England to any great extent. The money taken in from Russian-based sponsors, all this sort of stuff into the Conservative government.
I hadn't thought of it like this. So there's a hierarchy of concern, and in that hierarchy, £600,000 worth of donations to the SNP apparently going AWOL, possibly spent on, for example, a big camper van, is not registered. For you as a Lib Dem councillor, it is not something that's really setting your alarm bells off.
No, it's setting alarm bells off, but it's being dealt with effectively by the police, which has never happened in England for a multitude of these things. And that's the difference. The fact it's being dealt with, it's being investigated, right, that's fine. So get on with it, deal with it, tell us if there's a problem, and then deal with it after that. But the amount of things that have gone unsaid, unchecked,
all right. I don't know that I would
power and corruption.
Yeah, I don't know that I would join. I don't know that I would join you in that analysis, actually. But come one, come all. It's more than welcome. I can see the logic in it. I can see that notion of a hierarchy of apparent wrongdoing and thinking this doesn't rank that highly in it, and the response of the police, which could hardly be more robust. All three of them arrested, albeit released without charge, that forensic tents going up in the garden, and then you look at some of the other issues of concern with regard to both national politics and UK-wide politics, and you think that, do you know what, I'm interested in this, it's important they get to the bottom of it, but they seem to be looking at it a lot harder than they are other stuff. And then Philip in Inverness pops up in my inbox to say that not James Brexit and Trump, but Brexit, Trump and independence, Scottish independence, are all sides of the same populist coin. Just look at all the conspiracy theories you are hearing against the independent Scottish police and judiciary. I don't think I'd heard any, except perhaps Callum's suggestion that they're going after Nicola Sturgeon in Scotland a little bit harder than they're going after some political figures in England. But I don't know whether that's a conspiracy theory about the independent Scottish police and judiciary. I'd need the National Crime Agency to tell me how the Michelle Mone investigation is going in order to reach a proper judgment on that. But as with Callum, Philip, your comments are welcome. 11:30 is the time. Thomas Watts is here now with your headline. It is 11:34, and it is one of those days when the news can almost feel overwhelming, keeping a very close eye on events in Nottingham on your behalf. You'll be aware by now that a man is being held after 3 people were found dead in Nottingham city centre in the early hours of this morning, a 31-year-old arrested on suspicion of murder. Police say they are linking those deaths. More on that as and when it emerges. And then, of course, the unfolding court case against Donald Trump in America. But you can tell it's important. John Sopel's gone back to America to cover it. And we'll be catching up with him in about 12 minutes' time. I think there's a very real possibility of Trump getting the full sort of mugshot treatment this morning. I'll talk to John about this because he's the expert, not me. The shenanigans, for want of a better word, that Trump has been involved in pretty much since he announced his intention to run for president are so constant, so complete, that I think many of us are missing the significance of where he currently is. I mean, it's only 10 minutes ago he was in court for sex assault and found liable for sexual assault. It shouldn't have come as a massive surprise to anybody, given that he boasts about being a sex offender. He was caught on tape boasting about being a sex offender during the presidential campaign. And I think that there's so much scandal surrounding Donald Trump that the scale of the case he's currently facing may not have been fully appreciated. Sopel will be addressing that problem shortly on the programme. It is 25 minutes to 12. I'm going to read some text. We've had a sort of broad consensus of support for Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP so far. It's certainly not reflective of my inbox, albeit that it is currently reflective of my switchboard. Having said that, quite what John in Godalming's going on about, I'm not sure. He says, James, you're such an obvious unionist. Wise up. FFS, which is, of course, an abbreviated expletive. Okay, John. Good luck. Matt writes, this is ridiculous. This is suspected political corruption. You cannot just say it's okay as the end justifies the means, i.e. independence matters above all else. The same logic could be applied to the bus life of Brexit, which we all agree was appalling. We can't change standards based on the team, and that's what I was looking for. That's why I started using words like cultish and not feeling entirely comfortable about it. But that's the point. If you were a massive Brexiter, and believe me, they did do this, you'd excuse the lie on the side of the bus on the grounds that it justified the end. And the calls so far, charming though they have uniformly been, they're certainly flirting with the idea that the wrongdoing doesn't matter because the cause is so important. I like Matt's analysis. If you want to challenge it or indeed explore it further, the number you need is 0345 6060 973. I'll just read it again in case I'm getting unduly excited about its clarity and you want to pull it to pieces. This is suspected political corruption. You cannot just say it's okay as the ends justifies the means, i.e. independence matters above all else. The same logic could be applied to the Brexit bus lie, which we all agree was appalling. You can't change standards based on the team. Is that what's happening here? Is that what we've been listening to for the first half hour of this hour? And that is perhaps why John Curtis finds the statistics so interesting. The fact that you would realistically expect in an objective universe damage to be done to Nicola Sturgeon's personal popularity and support for the SNP, if not support for independence. And I understand the difficulty, perhaps impossibility, of separating the two, but you're kind of saying, it doesn't matter if something bad's gone on because we're all aiming for the same goal. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. Scott's in Clydebank. Scott, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome.
It really does matter whether a crime has been done or not. The crime does matter. But I think in Scotland, we've had a lot of education about media and press and politicisation of it and the whole footballification thing that you talk about all the time.
Yes.
And what matters more is evidence. So
yes,
there's a full forensic police investigation going on into this that came about because a member of the public felt something was done wrong and went to the police and made a complaint. Once there's evidence to prove it, personally, I'm an independent supporter. I'm not a member of the party. I have voted in for SNP, I've voted for Labour, I've voted for Lib Dem in the past.
Okay.
If it's found out that they have done something wrong, 100% punish them until the full extent of the law. But until then, this is really just politics. This is, here's some media, here's some attention, let's try and use this to see what points we can score for either side. And I think a lot of Scottish voters, we've just had such a saturation of it that we take it with a pinch of salt. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's the cult there. There is the footballification of people who will just support the SNP no matter what. Independence comes first. And I speak to these people all the time, online and forums, and nothing will get past them. Nothing matters more than independence.
Is there a siege mentality here as well? Is there a sense that the powers that be, whatever they are, have got it in for the SNP, and therefore, because I'm still drawn to Matt's analysis that there is an air of trying to excuse it on the grounds of the mission being more important than the members, as it were, of the mission. But it is because I don't know where the line is, Scott, between conspiracy theory and valid grievance sometimes. And it sounds to me like you're walking it at the moment.
I think for some people there is. For some people they see it as it's a conspiracy. They're out to get the SNP. And personally, I see it as just politicians and media doing what politicians and media do. They're trying to sell papers, they're trying to score points.
Yeah, so you've got a suspender. No, I don't. Here it is. Here's a front page. Yeah. I mean, even page 2 of the Telegraph. Weak Yousaf refuses to suspend Sturgeon after arrest.
Yeah, we had 2 days of front pages about pens, about how the investigation was looking into missing pens, and I think it was pens, notebooks and razors.
Right.
That's the level of front page headlines that you're seeing sometimes for 2 days. If you can't take that with a pinch of salt and see beyond things like that, then you're kind of lost in the scope of things.
Yeah, but on the other hand, if you don't think that a former leader of the party spending 8 hours being questioned by the police over missing money is a very, very big deal, then it's not about the size of the pinch of the salt. It's about giving your head a wobble, surely.
Well, to one extent, yes. But if you look at the facts of it, because there's a forensic police investigation being done, if a forensic investigation is being done into finances, it would be a natural expectation for the people who are responsible for signing off the finances to be interviewed by the police, wouldn't it?
Yes.
That would be a natural expectation.
Yes,
so
but that's an expectation built upon the fact that money's missing.
Money's allegedly missing.
Well, if it's only allegedly missing, where is it?
We'll find out at the end of the investigation. As far as the SNP finances have explained, which were signed off by auditors, which have been sent to the Electoral Commission and signed off by the Electoral Commission, the money has been accounted for. The issue is that
whether it was spent on the things that the
yes, that people wanted it to be
donors wanted it to be spent on, which is a different allegation perhaps to the one that somebody relying on London media might be thinking that it was all spent on holidays and fish suppers.
It's very different things. Is the money missing? Personally, from what I can research and what I've found and looked at finances, and I'm quite a logical person. I like to look at these things. I don't see how the money is missing. I can see how it's been spent differently than what the donations were meant for.
Still deeply questionable behaviour.
Yeah, but the party's explanation is there's funding available for that way as and when we're required to use it, which is a common business practice.
Okay, so I mean the allegations are very, very serious. They remain allegations, and as long as they remain allegations, it is perhaps not that shocking that support for the 3 points of that triangle, Sturgeon, SNP, independence, seems to be pretty steady. And in fact, even if... you can help me with this one. So even if it is found that crimes have been committed, support for independence and the SNP, under my reading this morning, is unlikely to be unduly damaged, because it's not going to change how people think about independence. And the SNP is the only vehicle in which they can get there.
To an extent, yeah, probably. I think you need to.
We use football. So I'm talking over you because I want to get the thoughts out while they're still fresh in my mind. So we use footballification as a pejorative, correctly, but on some issues, this is the problem, isn't it? Is that's how Brexiters would have felt, that anything's worth doing in order to get out of the European Union. They would have thought that lying was fine, or lying down with dogs was fine, or getting into bed with Nigel Farage was fine, or all of those things were fine because the goal was so desirable. And I am hearing unexpected echoes of that thinking this morning.
I think to an extent, yeah. I think if there was guilt to be found, you would probably see a lot more independence votes moving towards the Scottish Greens.
Okay,
some probably towards Abbot, but they're a very different party from the SNP and from the Greens. There as well, personally, I would be moving to my vote to the Greens. I don't think it would affect the vote for independence, because independence is not the SNP, and the SNP are not independents. The SNP are, as other callers have said, the only real viable route just now, because we don't have another option. If there was another left of centre party, and the SNP are not a left-wing party, they're a left of centre party.
Yeah, okay.
If there was another option there that gave the same kind of rhetoric and the same policies and mandates and stuff, they would have more support. But there isn't. So that's why the SNP has the level of support. When an independent Scotland does eventually come, and I believe in my heart of hearts that it will come, the SNP's voter base, and even the politicians within it, will separate. They'll move to other parties, or they'll move to other causes. Scottish politics has always been left of centre, and that's where it will continue to go.
No, that's a very helpful analysis. Thank you. Cheers for that, Scott. I think sometimes you're comparing. I compare apples with pears. So you try to imagine what would happen if another party found itself in these sort of situations, but that is not necessarily helpful. Although I go back to Matt's text earlier about the scale of the allegations being crucial to the treatment of the story, but that doesn't necessarily lead to people diminishing their support for independence. Thank you, mate. It's 11:40. Before I go, just a little quiz. Who do you think said this in 2017? Isn't it amazing? I'll give you 3 quotes, and you have to decide which one of them was Nadine Dories. All right, are you ready? Isn't it amazing, given the size of the party, how many Lib Dems sit in the Lords? Cronyism at its gizzard-job worst. Was that the Nadine Dories quote about the House of Lords? Or was it this one? Maybe so many of them they can't get called. Lords could sit for 24/7 and still couldn't get everyone in. Way too big, stroke many. Time to reform. Or is this the real quote from Nadine Dories? The Lords have messed up once too often. I, for one, will be lobbying for a bill to massively reduce the Lords in size, for positions to be elected on fixed terms equal to Parliament, and for powers to be reduced. So which one of those did Nadine Dories actually say? Did she say, A, isn't it amazing, given the size of the party, how many Lib Dems sit in the Lords? Cronyism at its gizzard job worst. Is it B, maybe so many of them they can't get called? Lords could sit for 20... This was a defence of Digby Pudding-Jones when it emerged that he hadn't spoken in a debate since April 2016, despite claiming £15,290 in attendance fees and expenses since that date. Did Nadine Dorries say, maybe so many of them can't get called? Lords could sit for 24/7 and still couldn't get everyone in. Way too big, stroke many, time to reform. Or is it C, the Lords have messed up once too often. I, for one, will be lobbying for a bill to massively reduce the Lords in size, for positions to be elected on fixed terms equal to Parliament and for powers to be reduced. Nadine Dorries, of course, today whining almost ceaselessly about being prevented from taking a seat in the House of Lords. So whichever one of those three things she did say, it's going to be pretty embarrassing. Which one do you think she actually said? It's 11:47. John Sopel bringing us up to date with American politics and Donald Trump's court case after this. 10 to 12 is the time. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, and you're about to listen to John Sopel, of course, co-presenter of the Newsagents podcast and indeed the Newsagents USA, and he is in the USA this morning. You can find both of those podcasts on Global Player. John's in downtown Miami to keep an eye on Donald Trump's latest court case. And John, I think we should begin by addressing how important this one is, because people who don't get paid to follow these events for a living could be forgiven for thinking it's just the latest in a long, almost endless stream of scandal and legal battle to engulf the former president. This is a biggie.
Yes, James, this is huge. I mean, this is Donald Trump, when he stopped being president, taking boxes and boxes of material, much of it classified with top secret that could harm the national interest of the United States, and taking it to his Mar-a-Lago country estate, which is a members club as well. And scattered around the members clubs were boxes containing all sorts of things. Let me just read you from Part 3 of the indictment, which said, stored in these boxes included information regarding defence and weapons capabilities of both the United States and foreign countries, United States nuclear programs, potential vulnerabilities of the United States and its allies to military attack, and plans for potential retaliation in response to a foreign attack. So kind of quite serious, really, if you think about it. Now that he has now got an indictment that is sort of 37 kind of lists long. And if found guilty on those charges, the consequences are very serious. And let me just put it in its absolute starkest, clearest terms. Donald Trump is running to be president in 2024. In 2 years' time, Donald Trump will either be sitting behind the Resolute desk in the Oval Office and the most powerful man in the world, or he will be behind bars in a federal prison. And that is what is at stake with what is unfolding today in this courthouse just down the road from where I am in downtown Miami.
Oh, crikey. Surely there's a third option, that he doesn't win. No, so the only way, if he's found guilty in this case, the only way he avoids jail is by being president.
Exactly, because then he can pardon himself. And also the trial process will take so long that he will be president and it will never come to pass. He will grant himself immunity. So the stakes are really enormous over this. And, you know, look, we had a previous indictment up in New York over him paying off a porn star. Should that have been a kind of something that would face a possible prison sentence? No, probably not. I think they overcooked it a bit.
Right.
This stuff is serious. And this is also the federal government. So the Department of Justice is behind this. He was in charge of the Department of Justice just 2.5 years ago before he stood down as president. And so the turnaround in events, and I think that, you know, a lot of people, even people who were loyal to Donald Trump, were saying, oh my God, this is, if half of this is true, this is his former Attorney General, Bill Barr, if half of this is true, he is toast. But the Trump narrative, and I think some people might recognise this from events of recent days in British politics, is to say this is all a witch hunt, this is all out to get me, this is the establishment trying to kill me off, and then going apocalyptic by then saying, if they get me, they'll be coming after you, and I am the last line of defence. And so today we expect Trump supporters to be turning up in some numbers and trying to create as much fuss as possible.
The Miami authorities will be prepared for that, but of course there's no way of knowing in advance what sort of scale of protest there might be, or indeed the nature of protest. And I mean, I don't think you need to be a particular critic of Donald Trump's to understand your description of him essentially inciting that kind of behaviour.
Yeah, and a lot of his supporters. I mean, I saw a tweet from a Republican congressman, and it was a call to arms. It was describing Donald Trump as the proper POTUS, i.e. he's the real, still 2.5 years on, and we've got to fight and we've got to resist this and we've got to be organised. And, and so you've got an elected congressman in the House of Representatives telling Americans to rise up against the forces of law and order.
And of course, it's worth mentioning that this happened a couple of months after Fox News settled to the tune of nearly $1 billion for spreading some of the nonsense that congressman is still subscribing to.
Yeah, and what is astonishing to me is the total lack of backbone of so many Republican candidates who are also running for the presidency because they think that you've got to appeal to Donald Trump's base if you're going to win the nomination. And the last thing you do if you're appealing to people who love Donald Trump is to turn around and say, well, Donald Trump is clearly a liar over this and is in huge amounts of trouble legally over it. And so that honestly, they're going to get whiplash. They are trying to look so far in the other direction and are going to dislocate their neck bones because they just, I can't see it. No, I'm sorry. I really can't see what you're talking about. And it is so obvious. And, there are some things where I have felt at times, oh my God, the media's going over the top or people are going over the top about this or that about Trump. This is really serious stuff. I mean, he knew. And it's not just that they're alleging this stuff. They've got these documents and they've got Donald Trump on tape at his Bedminster Golf Club, which is in New Jersey, talking to someone, showing a document, saying this is top secret. I can't declassify it now because I'm no longer president, and I shouldn't really have this. So don't say anything about it to anyone. So it kind of implies he knew what he was doing.
Yes, that's the mystery of him, of the man from the very start. Really, the Fifth Avenue shooting analogy has never sounded true. I can't remember whether you actually used the phrase nuclear secrets. I know you talked about military secrets, but there is a fairly irresistible case here for him illegally retaining nuclear secrets, which would have an enormous value on the world market. Is there any other theory as to why he might have wanted them? I mean, could it be chaotic behaviour? The notion of what he would want them for is as interesting, perhaps, as anything else.
But that gets into the psychology of Donald Trump.
Of course it does.
And
Sorry,
and it won't. Yeah, and that's why he won't. He should use the defence. I am chaotic, and I like bragging, because that is what it's about. It's bragging rights. Look what I've got. Hey, look, this is our assessment on Emmanuel Macron, which is one of the documents they've got. So how embarrassing would that be for U.S. relations with France if that was to get out? It's all about bragging rights a lot of the time, so he can show people, look, and he's got all his letters. The problem is that in America after Watergate, which led to the downfall of Richard Nixon, very strict laws were put in place that documents belong to the government. They don't belong to Donald Trump. There is some stuff that is archived, but if it is classified as either top secret, or confidential, it belongs to the US government. And when you hand over, it goes over to the National Archive of the US of A.
Of course.
And Donald Trump just drove a coach and horses through it.
Finally, John Sobel, how wary are you of attempts to bring Jared Kushner's relationship with the Saudi regime into these conversations?
Well, me personally,
Yeah.
I'm not wary at all. I mean, look, that's the other part of this, that the members of the family who were right with Donald Trump until he left office are nowhere to be seen. And Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump, who had key roles in the Trump administration, have not been seen anywhere near Donald Trump. Now, Jared Kushner may have his own problems with his close relationship with Saudi, and that all stems from him apparently being turned down by the Qataris, where he went to them first for money. And that nearly caused a major Gulf incident between Qatar. I mean, there was a no-fly zone around Qatar when the other Gulf states tried to choke it off. And a lot of that stems from the Trump presidency and attitudes towards Qatar because they wouldn't help Jared Kushner out, allegedly. So, I mean, it's so murky that you start wading into this mucky water and you just feel you're clogged down by it all.
And what is the best case scenario on a conclusion in this case? What is the soonest you might expect?
In this case, I think it'll be at least a year before you get to trial. And there are all sorts of pre-trial stuff that the Trump lawyers will be... But, literally as I speak to you now, Trump team have been ringing round trying to get lawyers to sign up to defend him because, one, they worry about the case, and two, he has a bad track record of paying his legal fees, and so no one wants to go near. So you haven't got. It's not like you would imagine if you are the former president of the United States and you're going on to be on trial. Any successful lawyer thinks, I want to be part of that. I want to be part of this, and they don't. And that is a real problem for them.
And something else he's completely subverted. Plenty for John Sopel and his team to get stuck into on the Newsagents podcast, and of course the Newsagents USA, both of which you can download from Global Player. John, as I mentioned at the outset, in Miami right now, where that case is due to start later today. Thank you, John Sopel. The time is 12 noon. 4 minutes after 12 is the time. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Interestingly, all the people getting in touch with me to talk, well, there's only 3, but all the people getting in touch to talk about Joe Biden's garage are proof of the story that we're going to talk about next. What you need to understand, Roger Brooks and others, is that Donald Trump was asked to return documents that he claimed he hadn't got, and then it turned out that he did. Any documents that Joe Biden shouldn't have been in possession of came to the authorities' attention because Joe Biden told them about it. So I can't wobble your head for you, but we move on next to the astonishing numbers of people in this country who now believe conspiracy theories. I've already seen a little bit of mild debunking, perhaps, of the statistics that I'm about to share with you. Not a debunking, but some of the people suggesting that they are sympathetic to some of the conspiracy theories put to them in this remarkable research had only heard the conspiracy theory when it was put to them during this remarkable research. So a headline saying that a third of the UK public think that the cost of living crisis is a government plot is an incredibly arresting headline. Obviously, it's not necessarily quite as apocalyptic as I might or you might have originally thought. Jasper Jackson of the New Statesman puts it, ex of the New Statesman, now of the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, puts it best. He says, unless I am missing something, it looks like a large chunk of the people who said they believed these conspiracy theories hadn't actually heard of them before the researchers mentioned it. But that's still, significant, because it means that people are susceptible to these sort of nonsenses once they are made aware of them. And whether you're made aware of them by going down a YouTube rabbit hole, or your Uncle Keith's Facebook page, or some weird new television channel where Nadine Dorries is likely to pop up any minute, or indeed Jacob Rees-Mogg is likely to be sitting there stroking Nigel Farage, I don't care where it starts. The point is that people believe it. So listen to some of this. About a third of the population are convinced, and again it breaks down into strongly believe and mildly believe. So there's a recurring figure of between 10 and 12% on all of these conspiracy theories. Here come the conspiracy theories. The first one is the Great Replacement Theory, a white supremacist trope that suggests white Americans and Europeans are being deliberately replaced by non-white immigrants, that there is a sort of a secret master plan. Well, all conspiracy theories involve secret master plans, don't they? That's where the conspiracy comes from. But that's 12%. Also 12%, 15-minute city plans are a government attempt to surveil people and restrict freedoms. These are traffic calming measures designed to discourage people from using their cars by making sure that everything they could possibly need is within walking distance. But 12% of the population apparently believe that these plans are a government attempt to surveil people and restrict freedoms. The terrorism cover-up. Media and government are apparently involved in a conspiracy to cover up information about UK terror attacks, which is so utterly ridiculous, especially as our attention is focused on Nottingham. And if that tragic events there do turn out to have any links whatsoever with terrorist activity, it will be absolutely everywhere within minutes. Once the police have made information available. The idea that it would be possible in any way to cover this up or to keep it secret is about as ridiculous as the Great Replacement Theory, or the idea that 15-minute cities are a government attempt to surveil people. The cost of living crisis, 11% believe, is a government plot to control the public. How does that work? It's a government plot to control the public. The actual cost of living crisis. And on 10%, we have the so-called Great Reset theory, which is the World Economic Forum initiative, is a conspiracy to impose a totalitarian world government. Now, what question would be most helpful in this context? I'm going to tell you what question would be most helpful in this context, and it's a question that you can answer without having to be connected to any conspiracists. But of course, if you are, the way we've always found most helpful to do this, it started with COVID conspiracists. And I think doesn't that get some coverage as well? Isn't there a significant number of people who think that the whole of the COVID-19 crisis was some sort of hoax? They think that climate change is a hoax. But those are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things I've picked up on first. Maybe we'll have a look at some of the other things too. I didn't used to do conspiracy theories on the programme for the same reason that we don't do phone-ins on people who think they've seen UFOs anymore. And I changed my mind. I don't think it was a mistake not to do them for the duration of the period in which we didn't do them. But I think when you found people being actively discouraged from getting vaccinated or from believing that the COVID-19 virus was a genuine threat or could be genuinely fatal, I felt it was time to at least acknowledge the existence of these sinister and siren voices, especially as they gained more profile and got louder. And the best way we found to do it was to talk to the people who loved them. So it was astonishingly how similar the stories were. How usually Facebook, actually, and that the first point of contact would be Facebook. People would start believing in the hoaxes and the conspiracy. I got a call. I always told you this. This was the point where I thought I'm going to have to change my tune. When I got a message off a lad I hadn't seen for 40 years, hand on heart, 40 years. But we're friends on Facebook because we went to school together in the 1980s. And he said, I don't know any other journalists, and I'm being sent a lot of this stuff. And it was about, I can't even remember completely what the conspiracy was. It was about phone masts. It was about phone masts being used to spread the virus, was it? Have I remembered that correctly? And yeah, the 5G phone masts, but was it that they were spreading the virus using the phone masts, I think? And you know, he sent me footage of someone who was apparently undercover finding proof that 5G phone masts would infect us with coronavirus. And that's when I changed my mind about covering this stuff, because he's a good lad and I know him well. Well, I knew him well, I beg your pardon, but, you know, it was that notion that he didn't know any journalists except me. So he sent me stuff he was being sent. I said, this is all a load of rubbish, isn't it? Can I just check? Because quite a few of my mates are falling for it. So when I read now, and those 12, 11, 10% figures on these 5 conspiracy theories, roughly double that number would be probably true rather than definitely true. So 12% of people asked think it's definitely true that there is a conspiracy to replace white people with brown people, that 15-minute city plans are a government attempt to surveil people and restrict freedoms, that media and government are involved in a conspiracy to cover up information about terror attacks. So that those are the people who strongly believe it. Roughly 20% on all of these questions think it's probably true. So you've got 12% think it's definitely true, 20% think it's probably true. So the balance is pretty chilling when you break it down. The number of people who now believe this stuff. And, of course, a lot of them are people like my old schoolmate who could have gone the other way. Oh, crikey, I'd never thought of that before. And then, as we've discovered by having these conversations on the programme, you find something on YouTube that supports one of these nonsenses, and suddenly your YouTube is full of more stuff that supports this nonsense until you're awash with it. And that's the point. This combination of Facebook and YouTube, that's the point where you start cutting yourself off from people who care for you. You start looking upon your fellow conspiracists online as your new family. Some of the most heartbreaking calls we took during the vaccine hoaxes were from people whose partners were drifting away from them. You can sort of agree not to talk about it, but that's only going to be a delay, isn't it, on a decline in a relationship? Because if one of them is fully signed up to this stuff, then eventually the relationship is going, I imagine, is going to go south. So the question that interests me the most, and bearing in mind I need to be careful not to give a platform or airspace to the sinister siren voices. I don't want people coming on sharing white supremacist rhetoric or lies about the World Economic Forum or the 15-minute city schemes. The problem I have is so obviously bonkers that I was never sympathetic to people who fell for it. It's odd, given the mantra that we have for Brexit, contempt for the con men, compassion for the conned. But I always found it pretty hard to move beyond dismissive contempt for anybody who believes this stuff. Whereas, of course, you should be confining your contempt to the people who peddle it. And they do so for money and clicks. It's not just money. They get a sense of power from having followers. And I will tell you the truth and nobody else can. But here's the question that fascinates me most. Why do people want to believe this stuff? I mean, have a look at our government, right? Just have a quick look now. Have a look at a government that can put, for example, Nadine Dories in a senior government position, Jacob Rees-Mogg in a senior government position, Grant Shapps in a senior government position. The idea that these people could undertake a massive secret plan to rob us of our rights and freedoms without us noticing is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, if we were governed by Vladimir Putin, then perhaps you could give credence to the idea that government surveillance you could give a lot of credence to the idea that government surveillance or the Great Reset, whatever it was, you could. But look at the absolute wazzocks that have been governing us for the last, pretty much the last 13 years. But my goodness me, the last 4 have been off the charts. The idea that lot could organise a proverbial knees up in a brewery, never mind some sort of totalitarian world government, without us noticing. It's a bit like the September the 11th stuff when you heard people talking about it being an inside job and the number of people who would need to be in on it without any one of the moon landings. The number of people who would need to have been in on it without one of them ever breaking cover. And it's very, very difficult to take it seriously. And yet there comes a point where you kind of have to. You have to take seriously the problems caused by the number of people believing the nonsense. And I think the best way for us to start that is to ask what is it that some people have that makes them want to believe this stuff? Because you've got to, it's a bit like a con man knows if 10 people are sitting around a table, a good con man will know which one he can rinse. There's something about them that means he'll know. Even a good salesman who's not selling snake oil, they're actually just looking to close a deal with something that is above board and legal. But 9 out of 10 people will decide that they don't want it. 1 out of 10 is susceptible. You're behind a stall at a market and everyone's gathering around while you do a demonstration of your magic vegetable chopper. And a good salesperson can tell who's going to be susceptible to the patter, to the technique. And a good con man can tell who is most likely to hand over their money for some magic beans or a box with bricks in that they believe is a hi-fi. You can tell. And what is it? What is it that makes people want to believe that there are deep, sinister, secret movements operating all around them and I think part of the answer to the question is probably contained within the next words that I'm going to say, that only they can see. What is it? What is that appetite? What is it? What differentiates people who are gullible enough for this stuff and people who are not? Because you have to change your dismissive attitude towards people, because it's a bit like junk food. You know, everybody knows that junk food is bad for them, but the effort put into making them eat it explains the obesity epidemic in this country. There's a dissonance. I know it's bad for me, but I'm still doing. There's a dissonance there. The effort now put into peddling these ludicrous conspiracy theories is such that you have to have a little bit of sympathy for the people who've fallen for it. So 2 ways into this. Number 1, talk to me about the people you know, the people you love who have fallen for all or any of these theories, the Great Replacement Theory, the 15-minute cities conspiracy, the terrorism cover-up, the cost of living crisis, the Great Reset Theory. What's it like trying to deal with us, trying to deal with them, trying to reason with them, and possibly drawing on that sort of experience, or, of course, just theorising more generally? What is it that makes some people want to believe this stuff? The idea that there are sinister, secret forces working all around them that nobody else is aware of. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Because, I'll say it again just for the avoidance of doubt. The idea that any of this lot could undertake a secret, they couldn't even have a party in Downing Street without getting caught. The idea that they could run a totalitarian world government without anybody noticing is, it would be funny if it wasn't now so popular. So let's get stuck into that. It's 12:19. 21 minutes after 12 is the time. What is it that makes people want to believe conspiracy theories? We're living in a weird era for them. I think COVID unleashed something, and lockdown magnified it, and the susceptibility of people to believe utter bobbins is probably higher than I can ever remember it being. The September the 11th attacks opened up some doors, the moon landings historically, but we've always managed to sort of keep them in their proper place. Something's changed, I think, since we came out of lockdown, and the people who were peddling lies about lockdown or lies about the virus in particular and the vaccines desperately need to find new things to keep their followers, and they found various absolute nonsense. The cost of living crisis. I almost want someone to explain to me how the cost of living crisis is a government plot to control the public. The worse it gets, the more likely the government is to get thrown out, to which presumably you respond by going, ha-ha, exactly. Daniel's in Slough. Daniel, what have you got?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I thought it was really interesting that you mentioned the World Economic Forum, because I don't know if you remember, a few years ago, I can't remember how many years ago it was, I think a Dutch journalist, Rutger Bregman, was part of a panel, and he said, the simple problem is to pay your taxes. And the people at the World Economic Forum looked at him quite incredulously.
I do remember. He was brilliant. We tried to get him on the show because, of course, not all the people attending the World Economic Forum, but an awful lot of the vested interests there will not be paying the same proportion of their income in taxes that ordinary people do. So, no, I do remember that.
And so I think that this conspiracy theory around the World Economic Forum is interesting, because the people that attend the World Economic Forum are not necessarily looking out for the best interests of you and I, right? They are people that are very powerful. They might be billionaires. They might be people high up in big governments that you don't necessarily agree with.
But there'll also be charities and quangos and people from, left-wing governments and socialist. Everybody goes to the World Economic Forum, Daniel. There's a clue in the title.
Okay, yeah, you're right. And
just to be clear, what's the clue?
Well, world, yeah.
Yeah.
So I think
let's draw the attention to what it is that makes someone keen to believe, for example, that the World Economic Forum is a conspiracy to impose a totalitarian world government rather than a sort of symposium designed to examine economic policy and economic theory.
Well, I think that obviously that instance with Rutger Bregman didn't help, right?
But I saw that, and it did not move my dial one iota closer to this forum exists to impose a totalitarian world government, not least because he said it on their stage.
And I think that if you see...
I'm going to push you towards the words totalitarian world government, Daniel.
If you see a world gathering of people, powerful people like that, it's easy to think that they're conspiring against you all together.
To set up a totalitarian world government?
Yeah.
What would that look like? Do you think? What would the next stage be?
I can't imagine that. But I think that it's a lot easier to think that there's this gathering of powerful people from all over the world in the Economic Forum than it is for you to think, oh well, the CEO of Disney is rinsing me for £2 extra out of Disney Plus this month.
I don't follow you. I don't follow you quite. I think you see a load of people in the same place and represent them all as plutocrats, even inaccurately. Then the idea that they must be up to something Yeah, all right. So they must be up to something, mustn't they? They can't just be doing what they say that they're doing.
Well, yes, but like it's easy to think that it's easy to think that there's something wrong with the world.
Yes,
right?
That's true.
And because there are things that are wrong with the world, and it's easy to think, okay, well, if there's something wrong with the world, and all these people are together, and they must be conspiring against me if they're all together in this one.
But that's the bit I don't get. I mean, you're not describing yourself, are you? You're speculating upon other people. But that's the bit I don't get. Why must... So literally, that they say they exist to improve the state of the world. You know, it's a little bit airy-fairy, isn't it? But then you get down into the detail of what it is that they do. Governments, businesses, civil society, quangos, Greta Thunberg's likely to turn up, Nigerian women leading national action against plastic pollution, power of AI in preventing wildfires. It's like a symposium for knowledge. You unless you're describing yourself, I don't know that we move any further into why would anyone want to believe that it was a secret plan to impose a totalitarian world government. You've got to really want that.
I think if you see the World Economic Forum, you don't necessarily see the charities that attend it, though. Like you
it's
see
hard
the
to miss,
big
even if you
billionaires.
pay the blindest bit of attention to it. It's maybe that's part of the answer. You don't pay the blindest bit of attention to it, but we haven't really moved much closer to the notion of a totalitarian world government. You have to want to believe that in order to believe it. You don't. I don't think you get kicked. I mean, you would get dragged kicking and screaming towards a belief like that if, for example, you were watching events in America on January the 6th and you'd spent a year or two thinking, nah, that kind of stuff never happens in America or the United Kingdom. That's Banana Republic territory. And then you actually watch a coup attempt incited by a defeated president claiming that he actually won. And you do actually end up believing in what once felt like a conspiracy. But you'd have to want to believe it in the context of a totalitarian world government. Thank you, mate. Mark's in Wimbledon. Mark, what's going on?
Well, I think that too, if we're looking at the reasons why people want to believe in conspiracy theories, if you can boil it down to two things I've kind of noticed. I've been looking at this quite a long time over the last couple of years. I think the first thing, to be honest, is fairly poor reasoning skills. You know, people that can't actually notice two things going on without adding them together and coming up with the wrong answer.
Okay.
And the second thing for me...
But there's loads and loads of people like that who aren't going to believe that the World Economic Forum is an attempt to impose a totalitarian world government.
No, of course not. And I'm not trying to say that everybody with poor reasoning skills ends up... But for me, it's a bit of a prerequisite. I think it's almost like the hard wiring, and then you get into a particular kind of environment. And if that's how you kind of tend to see the world, and we all know people, right, who are a bit suspicious, but then you get into a bit of a kind of an environment where you're a bit isolated, you start to look at, and the whole algorithm thing of social media, you know, it starts to come your way. And I think suddenly, it's the same with HIV. I mean, I don't remember, pretty too young, but, you know, at the time there were lots of theories about, it's funny, isn't it? You know, Thatcher's talking about family values, everybody hates gays. 5 minutes later, we've got this disease that's just called killing gays, you know. Right. But both things are true. But people then add them together. So then we have the kind of the AIDS conspiracy. So I do think there's something about poor reasoning skills. But the other thing, for me, this is quite central, that, you know, the belief, whether it's the moon landings, whether it's about HIV being set up, whether COVID not being true, all those things, it's not the belief that belief that matters. The belief in the middle of it that really matters is I am clever. You know, I am the one. I'm part of this intellectual kind of avant-garde. I can see things that other people can't see. And that's really reinforcing. Once you believe that you are clever, defined by what you think rather than how you think, you can't let that go, can you?
Oh, that's a nice phrase.
If my belief defines me as clever, I'm not going to let that go because then I'm no longer clever.
What you think, not how you think. That's brilliant.
Yeah, I think that's what defines us as clever, isn't it? And I mean, we can come up with all kinds of philosophical cliches, but around...
No, it is. It's how you think, not what you think. Whereas if you're using, this is what I think, and this proves I'm clever, and the fact that you can't see it proves you're not. Oh, it's perfect.
Absolutely. And there's something, I mean, Bertrand Russell says something like, you know, stupid people are cocksure themselves and the clever are full of doubt.
Yes.
I think, you know, clever, and I'm not being mean, I'm not trying to say that all these people are sick, but there is something about education kind of teaches people how to think. And you know, keeping an open mind and listening to these theories, but being able to let go of it and say, you know what, I was wrong. And I think people go down these holes where they just can't do that.
What about final bit of it? Because this is the bit you haven't touched on, which is, so here are 10 people who, through no fault of their own, haven't had great critical thinking educations or aren't. But out of those 10, only one's going to go down the totalitarian world government or the 15-minute cities or a government plan to surveil people and restrict our freedom. Do you see what I mean? So what is it even among the unblessed? What determines the susceptibility?
Well, I think it's stuff that's going on in your environment. It's like the whole kind of, stress vulnerability models of life. It's like, why do some people with a susceptibility to schizophrenia become schizophrenic and most won't? It's kind of what goes on in your life. You're becoming a bit isolated. You're not having a good day. You've got people who are suddenly your friends on social media who are sending you all this stuff. It's kind of what's going on around you. You've got the hard wiring of what we're like psychologically.
That's a good answer, isn't it? So that would bring the lockdowns into the picture and the proliferation of social media. It almost becomes an inevitable upshot of those two or three things. An awful lot of time locked up in your own home with access to all manner of madness from every corner of the universe.
Well, I think you're right. And then it becomes a cycle. The more you get locked up, the more you're kind of getting theories of why you're locked up, and then the more isolated you're becoming. And
the more unhappy you are about it, the more susceptible you are to the idea that there's a sinister master plan in place, rather than either a completely sound rationale for it, or a mistake made by politicians who thought they were doing something good, but probably made a mistake. You've got to acknowledge that possibility as well. But deliberately doing something bad is the point, and the worse you feel, perhaps the more tempting it is to conclude that others are deliberately doing something bad to you. So far, only 3 messages asking me how much I'm being paid by the World Economic Forum, and no way whatsoever of knowing how many of them are tongue-in-cheek and how many of them are not. I'm still waiting for my checks off George Soros. Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines. It is 12:35. I wonder whether you're slightly insulated from conspiracy theories by being pretty clear about how awful the people in plain sight actually are. The idea that there's secret, sinister conspiracies to control us all is impossible to sustain when you're looking at the people who are actually in charge and are conscious of how appalling they often, not always, are. I don't know, that's my two penneth. We're looking at the proliferation of belief in conspiracy theories, including some truly hat-stand ones that are potentially quite harmful for societies, and we're just wondering what it is that makes people want to believe nonsense. Heather is in Broxburn. Heather, what would you like to say?
Hi there, James. I help run Edinburgh Skeptic Society, actually.
Oh, fantastic.
And I wanted to thank you for all your retweets over the years.
You're very welcome. I've spoken to some of your colleagues, I think, in the past.
Probably Sean over in Fife, who's likely listening, so hello.
Yes.
Obviously we've been following conspiracy theories for years. I myself have been involved in skepticism for about 12 years now, and so kind of looking at why people believe this stuff. And to me, it always seems to be a way to make sense of the chaos, because the world is chaotic, confusing, and difficult to comprehend in the way it is. And a conspiracy theory, no matter how sinister, makes sense of that.
I think someone did an analogy about needing to believe that there is somewhat. Here it is. This is from Chris, who describes himself as an ex-conspiracy theorist. It's all about trying to find order in the chaos. There is a comfort drawn from thinking that all the random, horrific events in the world are somehow part of a plan. Think of it this way, James. You're on a plane to a mystery location and you can't see the cockpit. Conspiracy theorists are desperate to believe that there is a pilot behind the door because the alternative is too scary.
Yeah, and I think that's
sympathetic. I mean, that's nice, isn't it? You can.
I think that's why anyone is susceptible to it. If you're in the right conditions and in the right mindset, then it's easier to believe that. I mean, in skepticism, my focus has always been on alternative medicine because I'm ill myself and disabled myself. I can see how tempting it is to believe that Reiki could cure you because, when you're in pain every day, you're looking for hope anywhere. And similar to people who are struggling in life, if something makes sense of why they're struggling, no matter how sinister that is, it makes them feel better.
But why? I mean, here then talk about the invisibility, because I used to be, I think, certainly with reference to anti-immigration rhetoric, people who can be easily persuaded that their own lives are rubbish because of people below them in the food chain. I can see that happening, and I can understand why they'd want to do it. But if it's people in power, why would you not? And I think I was unkind in saying, if your life is rubbish, it's the invitation to believe that it's not your fault is irresistible. Whereas in fact, what we're looking at here is people who think their life is rubbish, and the people responsible for it are in front of them. They're not hiding in secret organisations. So the people responsible for inequality, for example, are right there in power. So why would they not go after them? Why would they instead go after secretive cabals and conspiracies?
I think, like your last caller was talking about, making it feel like they've got some secret information, because it can't be that easy. It can't be just the people who are there at top. It can't be. Some people like to have that convoluted thought path rather than just there's people in power taking advantage of people. You can see it, can't you? Quite intoxicating.
And a sort of camaraderie involved as well. You saw that during some of the weird marches when you had people talking about the Nazis in the context of the vaccines. Finally, how big an impact has lockdown had on the issue, do you think, if any?
I can see how it would have increased things. Like, I myself have been completely isolated. Lockdown's not ended for me because I'm immunocompromised. Yeah. And so I can see how if I didn't have the support networks that I do, that it'd be easy to start blaming things on outside forces rather than the reality of the world. And it can it's so depressing, the reality.
Yes,
of the
it is,
world
but it is deeply depressing, you're right. And I suppose any attempt to impose order on chaos is attractive. I like these conversations. Thank you for helping me out, Heather, because I don't want everybody listening to this who is in the 12%. I don't want you to feel alienated, and you might be feeling a little bit insulted, but we're just trying to understand how you've ended up in such a mess. Even as you insist, it's the rest of us who are in a mess. 12:41 is the time. Back to Nottingham now. Luke Shanahan is in Milton Street in Nottingham city centre for us. Luke, what's the latest?
Well, I'm in Milton Street, as you say, which is where a van reportedly tried to mow down 3 people early this morning. Those 3 people now in hospital. And, of course, on another 2 streets in the city centre, 3 people were found dead. A 31-year-old man's been arrested, and he's being questioned on suspicion of those 3 people's murder. And police are telling us they believe all 3 of these incidents are linked. They were first called to Ilkeston Road, that's a major street, into the city centre just after 4 a.m. That's where 2 people were found dead in the road. And reports then came in of the van here on Milton Street driving at pedestrians, trying to mow 3 people down. So officers, of course, were then called out here. Those 3 people now being entreated in hospital before another man was found dead over on Magdala Street, though we're not actually quite clear on the timeline around that 3rd death currently. As I say, police believe those deaths and injuries are all linked, and I've been asking people by the cordons here on Milton Street for their reaction to that.
Terrifying. It's absolutely petrifying. I've just been talking to a guy there who will know his missus is terrified to come out the house. Because, I'm looking over my shoulder as well now.
Someone had actually seen what's happened. What they said was, she was actually stood near, it was 2 people that were standing there, and a van ran into them. Yeah, so she was shaking because obviously she's witnessed that.
Stuff that you see in the movies, you won't really expect it to happen in Nottingham.
I can mirror those reactions myself. The atmosphere in the city centre is noticeably different. There are 6 cordons in place with multiple roads still shut by police who maintain a huge presence here. And many people who had come in for work have gone home. A lot of people haven't come into the city centre at all. But the people who are here, walking around, quiet, states of shock, surprise, fear on many faces, sure. And that is the state of things right now.
I know that Rishi Sunak has said that he's been kept up to date with events, which Paul Brand over at ITV, one of our colleagues here at LBC, has said is a mark of how serious the situation is, and possibly also a mark of police concerns that it may not be completely contained or completely over, albeit that the man believed to be responsible for the events you've just described, that the murders and the injuries you've just described, is in custody. I think I've seen the van, have I, Luke, on television coverage? I've seen the white van believed to have been involved in the incidents.
Yes, you may well have done. So it's believed that van is beyond the cordon over on Bentinck Road. and apparently it has clear damage to its bonnet, its windscreen, 2 dents on the bonnet just above the radiator grille, and cracks in the windscreen, which I guess could be from where it hit someone, but of course we're asked not to speculate about these things, and I don't feel we should.
No,
but that is what we're hearing reported at the moment, that's the van that was involved over here where I am on Milton Street.
Luke Shanahan live for LBC in Nottingham, where, as you have been hearing all morning, 3 people have been killed and a 31-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of murder. 3 dead in these incidents in Nottingham. Do remember that there'll be coverage throughout the day on LBC, and also comprehensive coverage on our website as well at lbc.co.uk. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I'll read you this quickly because it touches quite a lot of the topics that we're discussing this hour. I have close family members who are deeply down the rabbit hole of conspiracy theories. They want to believe it as it confirms the beliefs they already had about them. Them would be the deep state, the government, dark forces, the World Economic Forum, wanting to harm them in some way. There are people who already lived the alternative lifestyles outside of a system they didn't trust. So the COVID pandemic scared them into new levels of distrust. The state limiting their freedoms, pushing new vaccines. It sent them into a hysteria of fear, and a gathering of like-minded folk whipping it up further. Mariana Spring's new podcast on the BBC looks at this and is brilliant. My hometown of Totnes is a hotbed for conspiracy theory groups where hippie lifestyle has now blended with conspiracy beliefs. I think George Monbiot has picked up on this as well, the susceptibility of an alternative lifestyle somehow rendering you more susceptible to the sort of disinformation that accompanies conspiracy theories. You get that. I'm living outside the grid, which is quite an attractive, you might think of Tom and Barbara Good, or, I don't know, someone on a canal boat or something, but actually an active rejection of society, as opposed to a simple desire to live on the margins. An active rejection of society may well lead you down some fairly dark paths, partly to justify the decisions you've already made. Thank you for that. I wish your family members well, but I can only imagine what it's like trying to sort of have normal conversations with people when there's this enormous great elephant in the room. It's 12:46. 12:49 is the time. The COVID inquiry getting underway today with some early indications from Baroness Hallett of the direction in which she expects the inquiry to go. Some encouraging news, not least the fact that they will be doing sort of full reports on various stages of the inquiry, so it's not a case of waiting until the whole thing is over before we get to pick over their findings. But she also acknowledged what she called the need to strike a very difficult balance, stressing that grieving families would be at the heart of the hearing sessions. Well, some grieving families are unimpressed. The Bereaved Families for Justice, COVID-19 Bereaved Families for Justice UK campaign group in particular have been staging a demonstration outside the COVID inquiry. Fran Hall, who speaks for them in this context and whose husband died with COVID 3 weeks after they were married, they'd been together for 11 years, joins me now. Fran, it's good to talk to you again. I'm sorry it's always in such sad circumstances.
Hi, James.
What are you and your fellow campaigners particularly unhappy about or worried about?
So I think Baroness Hallett has said to us all along that we would be at the heart of the inquiry, but unfortunately we don't feel as though that's happening. So we offered to put forward 20 witnesses to speak in this particular module, and none of them have been accepted as witnesses. So today, as the inquiry opened, an incredibly powerful film was played to everyone that was in the hearing room, and it's viewable on YouTube, I believe, where people were giving their personal testimony. It was 10 minutes worth of 15 minutes worth of people telling their stories. So powerful was it that several people had to leave the hearing room because they were so emotional at watching it. And we have asked that pen portraits, that people can tell their stories, a short story, maybe 4 or 5 minutes worth, just their personal story that's appertaining to that particular module every day of the hearing, which is something that's very common in inquiries. It's very common for that to happen. But for whatever reason, that's not been allowed this time.
They haven't given you any reason for that? Because I know it did it happened at the Manchester Arena inquiry, and I think at Grenfell as well.
It did at both of them. It's a very common way of involving bereaved families, and I think possibly because of the magnitude, because of the scale of loss. We're looking at over 230,000 people are dead from COVID so far and counting. 300 people died last week of COVID in the UK. So it might be the magnitude, it might be because they've created the Every Story Matters facility, so anyone that was affected by COVID in any way can contribute to the Every Story Matters listening exercise.
Is there anything that Baroness Hallett or the inquiry could conceivably do moving forwards? And I mean more incrementally, Fran, than sort of spectacularly, just as you watch the wheels begin to turn. Is it possible that you'd be more encouraged, that there are things that would please you?
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, we're not discouraged at all. We're fully supportive of the inquiry. We're fully supportive of Baroness Hallett.
Right.
We're fully supportive of her winning the judicial review that's being brought against the inquiry. So it would just be much appreciated if there were more involvement from families who have stories that are relevant.
Yeah. And they haven't given you a direct explanation or an account of why they're not going to do that?
Not specifically, no. We've just been told that the Every Story Matters is the way that she's going to take the information.
What do you and your colleagues, I'm going to phrase this question carefully, what does your work involve? Because now it's 3 years of campaigning for this inquiry, and the inquiry is underway, so you see yourselves, I suspect, I hope, as almost scrutinising the scrutinisers.
Yeah, I think that we feel that we need to help to steer the inquiry. Our lead counsel, Pete Weatherby, this morning said we want 3 things from this inquiry. We want facts, accountability and change.
Yes.
And that's what we're hoping for. And by continuing to maintain our presence and to speaking as we can, hopefully that will happen.
I know that you are playing on that mobile billboard outside the venue, the pen portraits that you referred to earlier. If people want to have a look at that, how can they, and how can they get involved themselves as well?
So we're very easy to find on social media. So it's COVID-19 Bereaved Families for Justice. We're on all social media channels. We've got a website. Just use the facility of Google.
And how are you personally, Fran?
Yeah, I'm okay, thank you. It's good to be with fellow bereaved people today, but it's equally very emotional.
I'm sure it is.
But I'm okay.
And everyone listening will hope that you and all of your colleagues, indeed all of the bereaved families, get some answers to some, if not all, of the questions that you've been asking for the last few years. Fran Hall there from the COVID-19 Bereaved Families for Justice UK, expressing some misgivings about the early moments, the early openings of Baroness Hallett's inquiry, although stressing, of course, that it is very welcome, and at this stage you've got to have faith. It's 12:55. Back to conspiracy theories and this strange report today, arresting, jarring report into the numbers or the percentage of people who believe crazy things, with the caveat that, and quite cleverly pointed out by one journalist, that a lot of these crazy things seem to have been brought to the attention of some of the respondents to the poll by the people conducting the poll. But it still speaks of a susceptibility. And what is it that makes some people want to believe things that are simply not true? A lot of you drawing parallels with religion. A lot of you suggesting I would be uncomfortable with those parallels because I have over the years had relationships of my own with religion. I don't find that offensive at all. I think that enormous comfort is derived from believing in God, and I don't see how you derive enormous comfort from believing that the World Economic Forum is trying to impose a totalitarian government on the world. But I do get the general gist of what you're suggesting. Andy's in Preston. I haven't got long, Andy. I apologise, but we'll do our best in the time available. What did you want to say?
Yeah, I'm a bit nervous, but it just strikes a chord. My partner and I have been together for 7 years. Mental health has played a massive factor in it, but we're total opposites. So basically, I worked at a vaccine centre throughout it, and my partner called it akin to a jab abattoir while we were there. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. But with the reasoning and justification behind it, the things that I put together in my head are that he suffers from health anxiety, and this is pre-COVID. He always struggled to take medications and things like that. So this was a justification as to why to rebel against the cause, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so it gives him a rationale for doing what he wanted to do anyway.
Absolutely,
okay,
yeah. But the major factor in it, though, is social media.
Right.
And the algorithms, which are crazy. You search for one thing, and it suddenly creates links and cycles, and then you get a justification of being a part of something, which kind of isn't really there.
Well, but, I mean, it's there, but it's not there, in the sense that there are lots and lots of people believing it, but what they're believing is bunkum. That must be, I don't want to pry, but that must be quite hurtful. I mean, you'd like to think that he was getting that in his main relationship, or at least a lot of it.
Yeah, it's been a struggle, but we've got through it. We're on our way out of it. We just don't talk about it anymore. But it's we're still very much opposites. But it's just we struggle. But there's been arguments.
You can agree not to go there. And is it just in that one area? He hasn't gone down the 15-minute cities or the World Economic Forum.
Yeah, it includes all of the above.
Oh, really?
They're all linked. They're all part of the same thing. Control, as the previous caller said, reasoning as well. The inability to sort of figure out what's right and wrong. But yeah, it's quite scary. But we're both just sort of at peace with it. And
good.
One
and you love each
one
other.
Thing, the other believes. Absolutely.
And you love each other. Yeah. And I suppose as long as he's not trying to convert you, then you're all right. Although you might try a bit harder to try to convert him. I don't know. Thank you, Andy. That was nice. A nice human way to end that conversation, because I think in the past sometimes I've been a little bit dismissive, perhaps, of the humanity involved and the basic human vulnerability involved in believing crazy things. It's coming up to 12:59. That's it from me for another day. If you've missed any of today's show, you can, of course, download Global Player and rewind live radio, listen to all LBC's shows and catch up with the other global radio stations, watch all the clips. There's so much on Global Player. You must go and check it out for yourself. And we'll do it all again tomorrow morning from 10. Tom Swarbrick with you at 4. Sheila Fogarty with you now. 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 Sheila Fogarty with you now.